If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, share your true encounters and stories of humanoid beings, aliens, orbs, non-human creatures, UFO abductions, and other unexplained encounters. I have encountered humanoid white creatures in a forest and an abandoned barn near my little town. So I, 13 mil, and a couple of my friends, let's call them E, D, Z, S, and G, went exploring this barn last year. It is creepy. We found 2 knives, 1 old working toy, and an attic with something of value. The first time we went there, nothing seemed weird, but it still gave me the creeps. Next time, at the start of autumn last year, my 2 friends E and D went to check it out and see what we could do. It didn't go as planned. They saw a white, man-like creature in the barn and one outside spying in a bush. They sprinted for their bikes in the field and observed the creatures engaging in activities that were not typical for them, marking their first encounter. Second encounter, this happened about 2 weeks ago. I got injured in mid-autumn and basically couldn't do anything during the winter. We went there to do random shit and duck around like the 13-year-old dumbasses we are, and we searched the barn. Things were a little misplaced, nothing new. Thereafter, we go to check out the nearby forest, 6 p.m., and it is dark outside by now. We go by the forest and look inside. We hear something, some gibberish, and we watch because we are obviously scared and creeped out. We see some white creatures run around. We ran like 40 meters away and watched. Something came out and shouted some shit. I don't know whether we should go back and explore or not. Eastern Europe. Does anyone know similar cases or have some advice? I'm coming from left field here. I've explored a few abandoned and secluded buildings in the northern Delaware and Bucks County area in my day. I've encountered some strange occurrences during my explorations. It was usually just a feeling, sometimes accompanied by a strange noise or a quick flashing shadow. Recently, I moved from a house where I rented a room. I am convinced there was something really strange about the backyard. The edge of the yard ran up against a fence. There was a tree back there that had either been struck by lightning or had come down with some sort of disease, as it had been split down the middle and the bark was blackened down the affected areas. Anyway, more than once, I experienced an overwhelming sensation in my gut, as if something was lurking there. It made no sense to me either. Why would it be? And I also got the impression that the being was gray, skinny, and humanoid looking with large, unusually colored eyes prominent in its enormous head. I don't know. This unsettling vibe struck me more than once. I also constantly felt as if something/someone was watching me from outside one of my 2 bedroom windows as I lay in bed. Humanoid figure in woods. This did not happen to me, but it happened to my dad and his at the time girlfriend several years ago. He, his girlfriend, and a couple of their friends were camping at a park near the woods. He and his girlfriend decided to take a walk alone together after dinner. They walked deep into the woods, casually chatting. On their way back, a skinny, lanky humanoid figure with abnormally long and bony limbs that stretched inhumanely far as it ran darted across the trail in front of them. Mind you, it's nighttime, pitch black, and they're the only ones in the woods. The creature vanished as swiftly as it emerged, leaving no traces behind. They never saw the creature again, and it scared his girlfriend so badly that she refused to discuss it, even with him. He hadn't spoken about it until he told me about it last night. Bow-legged humanoid. I just came across a creature walking on 2 bowed legs while walking my dog with my fiancée. It seemed to have an unnatural gait to it, and as it passed by 2 separate streetlights, they shut off. After he turned a corner out of sight, they came back on, and we waited for a few minutes to see if it would come back around. When it didn't reappear, we started to head back. I happened to glance back and spot the creature as we got closer to my house. It was way closer this time, about 40 feet away and moving towards us completely silently. It had a jagged way of walking and was entirely silhouetted. It seemed to have changed from a bow-legged walk to more of a reverse kneecap stance, like a fawn. What do you guys think? I can't think of anything that matches what I just saw tonight, but I definitely got a bad vibe from it. Midnight in Death Valley. I just stumbled upon this channel, and it reminded me of an encounter I had in Death Valley in 2017. I wanted to put it out there to see if anyone else has experienced anything like it. During my work visit to the United States, I had 4 days to spare before my return flight to the UK. I was in Denver and decided to hire a motorcycle and ride to LA, where my return flight was from. I had an incredible ride seeing some amazing things as I sped through Utah and into Nevada, and I reached Vegas with 2 days remaining. I decided I wanted to ride through Death Valley and up to Yosemite before blasting down California to LA. By the time I got to Death Valley, it was getting dark, and as I progressed through the national park, it became pitch black, with me being pretty much the only person on the road. The only things I could see were the illumination of my bike's headlights lighting up the road ahead and about 3 meters on either side of the tarmac. I hit a long straight and started looking around. Something felt off. Then I noticed a large shape on the side of the road ahead. That's a big cactus, I thought to myself. I would put it at about 7 feet tall. As I got closer, I could see that it had humanoid features, like a very obvious outline of something with a head, shoulders, legs. I was fixated on it as I rode, and the closer I got, the weirder things felt. Then, as my bike's headlights lit it up, I could see it was a humanoid figure, and as I rode past it, it turned its body to follow me. It was nearly 50 degrees Celsius, and I had been sweating all day, but in the moment I was overcome with freezing cold and shivers. I still get the shivers when I think about it now. I twisted the throttle and got the hell out of there, repeating duck to myself in my helmet. It was a very spooky and strange encounter. Has anyone else seen or heard of similar encounters in Death Valley and been able to shed any light on what I saw? Weird humanoid creature in Thunder Bay, Ontario, last night. Me and my friend were Pokemon hunting at 1 a.m., and we saw this thing run along the road in front of us. It was far away, but it looked massive, bigger than a car. It was extremely fast and had a lanky but also stocky body. It was thick, but you could see its ribs almost, but again, it was far away, so I can't say. It was on all fours as well. It lacked a distinct neck, and its head appeared to be merely attached to its shoulders. Its body was hunched, but its head was held up. It was super pale and pasty and just grotesque looking. Can anyone please tell us what we saw because neither of us can explain it? I might try to draw it to see if it will help anyone identify it, but what seriously freaked us out was that there was a story about a skinwalker detailing almost the same thing but not as big, like 76 days ago. I'm not sure if it was the same, though, because there definitely were some key differences, but it sounded fairly similar. I was reading through the replies, and someone had asked her where she was, and she said Thunder Bay. So, there definitely is something around here, and the way she described the area, i.e., abandoned train tracks in close proximity to a forest, I think she even mentioned being close to the lake, it sounded like the same area of town. I asked her, but she hasn't responded yet. Hopefully someone can explain this because I'm more curious than anything now. Humanoid creature walking backwards on all fours in Piazza San Silvestro, Rome, Italy, February 2007. I was on a long-distance phone call one cloudy and gray afternoon when I saw it. Sitting inside a bus in Piazza San Silvestro that was waiting for the time to depart, I saw it through the bus window walking by, about 30 or so feet away. He was unusually large/long, maybe at least 10 feet in length from head to feet, though I'd say arms to legs because his arms extended further past his head as he made his way by toward the north side of the city. Picture someone doing a back bridge, but with long, gangly limbs, walking on hands and feet. I believe his head was facing frontward, rather than upside down, like a normal human would be in a back bridge position. The closest thing online I could find to this creature visually is the country road creature, but this humanoid seemed less spindly in limbs and was clothed. I don't necessarily know that it was a he, but it appeared to be more masculine than feminine. He walked slowly by, with protruding arms and legs that seemed stiff, taking slow steps as though it required great effort to move. He wore tattered, brown/gray, and dirty rags, giving the impression that he had been living on the street for some time. His appearance was unkempt, but it did not seem that people around reacted much. I wondered if he frequented the area and was known by locals. I was astounded, as I had never seen a creature/person like this before. For years, I have wondered if he was simply living with a developmental deformity, but I never saw him again the rest of the time I lived in that city. Has anyone seen such a creature/person? Leprechaun attack. Location, Detroit, Michigan. Date, August 3, 2013, midnight. The two witnesses had decided to walk over to Perrion Park and hang out, smoke some weed. They found a secluded bench and sat down. When they decided to leave the park, they heard something rustling in the trees behind them, followed by what sounded like laughter, tiny, high-pitched, almost childlike laughter. They thought at first it was someone messing with them and stood up and yelled out, "Cut it out, jackasses, we're not falling for it." The statement was met with more laughter and more rustling from the trees. Suddenly two small people jumped out of the tree and almost floated down to the ground in front of them. The witnesses jumped back when they saw these two small people, almost yelling at the surprise that their sudden appearance had given them. These two small people, who both looked male, were no more than 4 feet tall, stocky, and appeared to be wearing green three-piece suits. They almost looked like they were wearing leprechaun costumes and carrying what looked like walking sticks. They looked at the witnesses for about 5 seconds, no sound, and no movement. They were totally and completely freaked out and decided to get out of there as quickly as possible. The moment they moved to start backing away, these two things jumped at them, covering the 6 to 7 feet between them in a single instant. They were on top of them, screaming loudly as they bit, scratched, and hit the witnesses with the sticks they were carrying. The entities were screaming in such an inhuman way that it sounded like an animal in distress crossed with a feral human. They were laughing and screaming as they swung sticks at the witnesses' heads and ripped their clothes. Overpowered, all the witnesses could do was attempt to get away from these creatures and protect their heads from the sticks that the creatures were using. Almost as quickly as it began, it came to an end, as the creatures leapt off of the witnesses, bolted towards the trees, and vanished with nothing but maniacal laughter. The two witnesses got up and sprinted home as fast as they could go. Both witnesses suffered a collection of scratches, scrapes, and welts to show for their encounter. My father saw what I can only extrapolate was a gnome when he was a very young child. When he was a kid around 7 to 9 years old, he suffered very bad night terrors that would wake him up and keep him awake all hours of the night. Sometimes, to calm himself down, he would take his pillow and blankets and make a place to sleep beside his older brother's bed. Well, one night he had a nightmare and went into his brother's room to go to sleep. He got comfortable on the floor, and when he looked under the bed, he saw a man standing there. He said he couldn't have been more than about 3 to 4 inches tall. His skin was white, and his clothes were all green, with a green pointed hat and a long beard. My father told me he emanated with a bright, green light, and when he looked at him, he didn't feel any malice or anything, just confusion at what he was seeing. After a few seconds staring, he said he blinked and it just vanished. My aunt, Dad's sister, had stories of seeing a little woman in her mother's garden, which I can only assume was a fairy of some kind. My father's family are second-generation Irish immigrants. I wonder if such things follow people across the ocean. I have had multiple experiences with shadow people. This happened when I was really young. I was about 6 to 9 years old. A little backstory, I had a significant trauma happen to me when I was 6. I don't want to go into details, but it made life difficult for a while. I totally shut down for a bit, and sleep at the time was my only safe haven. For the next couple of years after my incident, my dreams got stranger and stranger. I at first only saw them in the background of my dreams. Like part of the scenery almost. Then I began to lucid dream. All of a sudden these dark shadow people with red eyes began to manifest in my room. I never felt danger from them, and that gave me a sense of relief. I would talk to them like they were someone I knew, and I would tell them about my day. A lot of times these conversations would end because they would hear something and move off my bed. I would wake from my semi-asleep state and try to go after them. Towards the end of my encounters with these creatures, I got a sense of terror, and I could never pinpoint it until one night a white figure came through my door and reached out with a knife toward me. I woke up with a jolt and never saw any of them again. Though I will sometimes see one of them dart out of my vision. From the Maryland Standard, November 1, 1883. A queer old bugaboo. What a little miss saw as she skipped along to the spring. A remarkable incident happened to a little daughter of Captain William L. Pratt, of King George County, last Monday evening. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she started towards the spring, which was about 200 yards away from the house, to fetch a bucket of water. About halfway through, as she passed a peach tree near the path, she experienced an indescribable sensation. Her hair felt as though it was standing on end, and a heavy pressure on the shoulders almost crashed her to the earth. With difficulty she walked to the spring, got her water, and started back. Arriving at the same tree, something came out of the weeds in front of her, crossed the path, and disappeared. The object appeared to be moving just above the ground but not touching it. It was covered with something like an old coat, with the sleeves hanging down, one on each side. Short, kinky hair covered its head, and it appeared to lack a face, eyes, or feet. Its disappearing in an open space seems to be the mystery, and the further fact that the weakness and pressure left the little girl as soon as it disappeared. The little girl was very much alarmed at the time and says while this object was passing, she could not have moved out of her tracks or spoken if her life depended upon it. The mother reports that she was as pale as a corpse when she reached the house. Her father, Captain Pratt, was in town, and she feared it was a token of some accident that had or would happen to him. She watched steadily for him until he got in sight of the house on his return, when she clapped her hands for joy and shouted, "Papa is coming." However, he does not believe in ghosts or supernatural entities, and this mystery is causing him significant concern. The little girl is about 11 years old. Creature with giant eyes staring at me. Sudbury, Ontario, Canada, December 30, 1997. In 1998, I had some experience living in Sudbury, Ontario. In a basement suite we rented, there was a red orb in the bushes. I thought nothing of it. Then, a day or two later, I was in my living room. I found myself frozen with fear as the curtains opened about 4 inches wide. There was a gray alien staring in at me. The fear was so intense I couldn't move or speak. I can't tell you how long the stare was, but my guess is it was 1 to 2 minutes. I couldn't break the visual contact until it instantly disappeared. I told my partner what had happened, and he prayed with me. The next day my daughter came out of her room and said, "I don't like the man in the window with the big black eyes." But no one was there. Not long after that, a soccer ball-sized light shot past the window at an incredible speed. The next day, weird paranormal things started to happen. We had a TV that was not plugged in, and it turned on its own. The screen was all static, and it closed up into a point of light. The light flashed for several seconds. This incident has profoundly affected me. I still don't want to talk to anyone about it. I'm scared of the dark and can't sleep well a lot of nights. I've had other UFO sightings, but none that compare to what I saw that night. Possible humanoid sighting in Oregon. I had taken my dog outside to have a cigar, and about halfway through my cigar, I started to notice flickers and flashes of light in both crescent shapes and orbs. There was cloud cover but no thunderstorms. The light seemed to be both in the clouds at times and also under the clouds. The shape did not even loosely resemble lightning. As I watched this very lengthy light show, I was aware of a passing car. My dog then began to get unnerved and looked in the same direction as I was looking. As the car came closer down the road, across the street I noticed a pair of eyes as if an animal's eyes were reflecting in the light, except they were a deep purple/indigo. As the car passed, I watched the spot where I had observed the eyes and was shocked to see a whitish humanoid shape stand up and quickly walk into the neighboring yard across the street. My heart began to race, and I became quite unnerved. I called my wife outside and told her what I'd seen and asked her to look at the lights in the sky as well. She confirmed that something was flickering/flashing in multiple spots. We both got very nervous and came inside the house. As I write this, my heart is still pounding in my chest. All through this episode, the dog also was alert and cautiously raising and lowering her head as she watched something more that we couldn't see across the street. Also, I heard a jet pretty low with a loud roaring sound afterwards. Circa 1930s, Norway, rural farmland. A 14-year-old girl, she was performing her daily duties on her parents' ranch when she noticed something behind the barn. As she looked closer, she saw 2 huge eyes and a partial dark gray forehead, as well as huge shoulders peeking out from the barn. She could see the shoulders move up and down as the being was moving. It was humanoid in shape, but the head was massive and shaped like a block. It seemed to peek at her, then shy away and slink down. Another 30 seconds or so, and it comes back to looking at her. Its face was not scary or mean looking, as she had heard some trolls were. The girl was speechless and scared. The barn was approximately 20 feet in height, and anything just barely hiding behind it would have to be massive. She had heard the old stories of trolls in Norway, as they are classic folklore in her culture. She felt as if the being was also scared and stuck where it was for some reason. She went and told her father, and her father looked at her sharply, and they went out cautiously to inspect. When they rounded the corner, they saw huge, strange footprints in the mud by the barn. But there was no troll. Instead, there was a huge granite boulder. She explained that it had approximately the same mass as a troll would have. It must have weighed many, many tons. The boulder was not on the land previously, as the family would have seen it. Her father told her that some of these beings have the ability to become boulders at will. That's how they hide from people. Others are turned into boulders if they are exposed to too much sunlight. He told her that perhaps she saw the spirit of the stone, or the true being behind it. She had also heard fairy tales of there being people who lived in stones, so this seemed plausible. The people in this region were deeply connected to their folklore. The family never experienced any other beings or activity at the property, and the ground around the boulder would always produce the most colorful flowers and plants during the springtime. The girl felt a special connection to the boulder and would have picnics out by it and talked to it. She felt that the troll and the boulder were one and the same. She even said when she looked at it long enough, she would start to see the same face appear. Supposedly, the boulder is still in the same place to this day. It is happily content in the countryside, with plants and vegetables growing all around it. An insanely fast humanoid ran past us in the woods. My 3 friends and I are walking on a shortcut trail to his house at 2 a.m. It's not much of a shortcut, though, as it takes you deep into the woods. Halfway through the woods is this giant open field where a park is. It's a full moon, so we can see far, but there is a layer of fog above the ground, perfect weather for this type of thing, right? I'm in front and see a short white figure with 2 legs dart across the field in front of us at an inhuman speed. At first I thought I was just seeing things because I'm skeptical of all of this, but I turned around and my friends were freaking out as they all saw it too. We all describe it as about a 5-foot-tall white humanoid hunched over running by on 2 legs. The thing that gets me was the speed and silence of this thing. We never heard a sound, and it crossed the field in the blink of an eye. It was dead silent, so I feel like we would have heard any type of animal running through the woods at that speed. It was too fast to be a human, for sure. My only explanation was that it was a deer or coyote, and due to the fog and darkness, we saw it differently. I had a strange experience in a graveyard a few years ago. In late 2017, I was hanging out with a friend, and we decided to visit the graveyard that was pretty close to her house. It was really dark, and I was too young to be out that late, so I was pretty reluctant, but I hadn't visited my granny's grave in a while, and my friend wanted to visit her brother, so I went along. When we got there, the main entrance was chained up, so we slipped through a gap in the fence and started walking up the hill to the main part of the graveyard. We found her brother pretty quickly and then decided to go find my granny. This is where shit gets weird. We were about to walk down the hill when we saw 3 red lights in the trees. At first I assumed it was a car because the graveyard is right beside a main road, but then I realized the road was behind us, where we originally entered. The lights were in another part of the graveyard, an older part, I think. My friend instantly froze, but I kept moving towards them while she urged me to stop. I didn't understand why she was freaking out so bad, but I didn't have my glasses on, so it took me longer to realize they were moving towards us. The way they were floating was pretty weird too. They weren't bobbing at all, like how they would if it was a flashlight or something. They were completely still and silent when moving towards us, but I wouldn't describe them as orbs or anything like that. The lights blinked on and off a few times, but that might have been them briefly moving behind trees. I couldn't completely see. At first I felt kind of a pull towards them, and once we left the cemetery, I regretted not getting closer even though I was petrified. I realized they had gotten quite close, less than 20 meters from us, and then they suddenly started moving a lot quicker. My friend grabbed me, and we both sprinted through the graveyard, jumping graves, and as I ran, I looked over my shoulder to see they were directly behind us. We reached the fence and slipped through the gap, ran halfway home, and didn't leave the house for the rest of the night. My friend and I never spoke of them again, and my friend never had any after effects, but I felt the strong urge to go back for a few hours after, despite being completely terrified. This was also weird because the entire experience wasn't super scary, and I don't get scared easily. I still haven't returned to the graveyard. Anyone know what this could be? Red-eyed beings started to hunt us. Alien humanoid. Vernal, Utah, on February 10, 2013, at about 1:30 a.m., I and my son were in my driveway installing a stereo in my Durango when we heard in the field across our street coyotes had started to feed the kits, a very late pack of them, when we heard several, howls from something unknown, and then they began to hoot at each other. And then all hell broke out. It seemed that whatever was howling attacked the coyotes and was tearing them apart. It was very, very loud and terrifying to listen to. After it ended, my neighbor came out and asked us what the hell it was. We said we had no idea what just attacked the coyotes. We went into the woods to see but had a terrible fear and went into our home. The next evening it was raining a lot, and I had several friends over and told them of what we heard, so we all went outside to tell and show them about where it happened, and in the field were red glowing eyes staring right at us. I hit them with a laser pointer, and then from behind the first 4 and then 6 more stepped out from behind it, and then they were like jumping and frolicking about each other, but at all times the first one stayed staring at us. When I noticed that 2 on each side started walking to the toe side of the field, I said, "They are hunting us, and we're trying to gain our flanks," and we ran into our home. We waited several hours, but all through the night they were there staring at my house. The next day they were gone. We could not find footprints, which was crazy, as it rained all night. When we measured to the height of the red eyes, they were at about 10 feet tall. After that I have had several strange events, and floating strong orbs in the sky above my home. One night, my son, a friend, and I witnessed one of the flashing lighted crafts land in the mountain range just above my home. I have been unable to shake the fear and uneasy feelings after these events. My dogs have several times run into my home and been scared and ready to attack whatever had spooked them. One night a terrible swooshing wing and a jet-like explosion blew through my yard, and a tree in my backyard that had fallen down going in a south direction was picked up, turned 180 degrees, and sat down with no markings from it being moved in the earth. I live in fear and unease. I can't even leave my house some days from the fear. I don't know what is surrounding my home and life, but it is getting worse. I need help, please. I and my brother saw a humanoid figure in the sky but didn't acknowledge it until after it had passed. I'm in my early 30s now, but this happened back when I was a teen and when TVs still had the big back portion to hide all the components. Just to give some kind of time reference. Anyway, this happened in a desert city in California, in what used to be a small town, but it's grown so much since then. My brother and I were in my mother's bedroom watching the TV, and the TV was right in front of the window so we could see outside. All of a sudden this black humanoid thing came slowly drifting across the sky. I could see its legs, and even though it was in the sky, I could see its human shape, so I say it was humanoid. Like a man on a jetpack. The weird thing is that once it passed over the house into the distance is when I started to acknowledge what I saw. I wasn't sure if my brother had seen it too. Without explaining anything about what I saw, I turned to him and asked, "Did you see that?" And my brother said, "Yeah, WTF was that?" I told him, "It looked like a man in the sky, right?" And he said, "Yeah." We never knew what it was, only that it looked like a man slowly hovering and moving in the sky. It must have been a pretty tall figure for us to see the human shape it had while in the sky. An incredible account from Seville, Spain. Location, Cerro del Hierro, Sevilla, Spain. Date, January 2001. Time, 5. A family of 4 that included a 19-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son had gone out to picnic in a rugged, abandoned strip mine area. As they walked towards the nearby edge of the mining gorge, after parking their vehicle, they noticed a bright flash of light from behind a nearby hill, and then there was a loud sound resembling exploding firecrackers. The 13-year-old boy hopped on his bicycle and began approaching the area. Being dangerous terrain, his father prevented him from going any further. Again the loud exploding sounds were heard. The family then arrived at the edge of the strip mining gorge and soon noticed 2 strangely dressed figures at the bottom of the gorge, who appeared to be digging or surveying the terrain. As they watched the 2 figures, another bright flash of light emanated from behind a path directly above the figures. As the witnesses approached the edge of the gorge, the 2 figures suddenly turned around and stared at them. The family then noticed that the figures were wearing dull gray-colored coveralls. They seemed to be wearing some sort of masks that prevented the witnesses from seeing any facial features. But the girl thought that their heads were somewhat larger than normal. Apparently startled by the sudden intrusion of the family, the 2 figures began to leave the area using very quick and inhuman movements, one of them traversing a distance of 300 meters in a matter of seconds. The other figure, using several vertical jumps of more than 30 meters each, climbed the rocky wall of the gorge. The 2 figures were now level with the witnesses and standing across the gorge about 600 yards away. At this point, the bright flashes behind the path increased in intensity and quantity. The father then approached the edge of the gorge and saw more flashes at its bottom. Suddenly 2 more similarly garbed beings appeared. These seemed to glide about 50 centimeters above the ground and were carrying something very bright in their hands. These 2 new figures stopped briefly and looked at the witnesses, then followed the path that the other 2 humanoids had taken. Their bodies appear to give off bright flashes of light. Suddenly one of the figures, again using very quick movements, glided back down to the bottom of the gorge and seemed to search for something. In seconds it returned back to join the others. At this point the family became hysterical, the mother feeling an intense pressure in her eardrums. The 2 younger members were screaming hysterically, and all felt drained of energy. Suddenly a metallic gray oval-shaped craft appeared behind the 4 humanoids and descended to about a meter from the ground. The 4 humanoids then disappeared into the object in an unknown manner, since no opening was seen. The family thought that the object must have been larger inside than what appeared to be on the outside. The craft then suddenly flashed and shot away at an angle, disappearing at tremendous speed. A tall, skinny, white humanoid figure with the head of an anteater stared at me as I drank water. So I woke up at dawn because I was very thirsty. I grabbed the water bottle that I keep next to my head and opened my eyes to see this tall, skinny entity standing near the door of my bathroom. It was about 6 to 7 feet tall. White. It was extremely thin, with a narrow chest and waist. Its ribs and the bones on its elongated arms, which were bent at an angle, were visible to me. I didn't see its feet or legs, but it had the head of an anteater. With beady black eyes. Somehow, I didn't feel threatened or anxious. It felt like it was just supposed to be there. I remember keeping my water bottle away and falling asleep and waking up for work. I remembered the event and immediately wrote it down. The weirdest part is that I didn't see it. I would describe it as seeing a red car and then trying to tell someone else about it an hour later. I can see the car. I knew I saw it. But I didn't physically experience the sighting. It's extremely difficult to explain, and it shouldn't be. One of the things I do for a living is write copy and captions for marketing material. I can't describe this. It feels so strange thinking about it now. I get this strange taste in my mouth when I even think of the memory. Some said that this is in line with alien abductions, and someone else mentioned their husband saw it earlier. I don't know what this is, so can someone please help me out? For the record, I don't smoke, drink, or do drugs. I'm a healthy 25-year-old male. I live alone. Nothing special is going on in my life. I had a very strange encounter with 2 Bigfoots and a UFO. Location: near Uniontown, Pennsylvania. Date: October 25, 1973. Time: 2100. Around 2100, about 15 people observed a very large spherical red object hovering low in the sky, which began to descend towards a pasture. The witness and 2 boys proceeded up the field and observed a white, dome-shaped object on the ground that illuminated the area and was making a loud whirring sound. We estimated its diameter to be about 100 feet. They were about 250 feet from the object and about 75 feet from a fence line. Walking along the fence line were 2 tall figures, 7 to 9 feet tall, covered with hair, with arms hanging down past the knees, and displaying glowing green eyes. The creatures were fired upon. First, tracers were shot overhead, and then live ammo was used. The larger of the 2 creatures turned towards the other, almost touching it, and at the same time the object in the field disappeared, and the sound stopped. The creatures slowly walked towards the woods. 1 boy had already run home, the other 2 left the field, went to the farmhouse, moved the family members to a neighbor's home, and called the state police. When the trooper arrived, he and the main witness went to the site, and where the object had landed, there was a glowing area that, according to the trooper, was about 150 feet in diameter. He said he could read a newspaper with the amount of light it was emitting. The farm animals refused to go into the area. One witness reported that before they left the field, the larger of the 2 creatures was seen in the woods about 10 feet from them, and he shot at it, and it struck the fence that stood between them. Later that night the investigation team, which included the main witness, Stephen, Stan Gordon, Dave Baker, Dave Smith, George Lutz, and Dennis Smeltzer, arrived in the area. Radiation levels are normal, the glowing area is now gone, but animals still wouldn't go near the spot. Strange events now began to take place. Some in the party witnessed a farmhouse several hundred feet away suddenly light up like daylight for several seconds. A bull in the field and a dog seemed unconcerned about the group and were looking into the woods. The main witness, a rather large individual, while being questioned, suddenly begins to growl, throwing his father and investigator George Lutz towards the ground. The man ran into the field, growling like an animal and emitting screams, one that was near inhuman. His own dog approached him as if to attack, then ran off whimpering. The man suddenly collapses onto the ground. Then 2 of the investigating team begin to complain that they are having trouble breathing. Suddenly, a strong odor reminiscent of rotten eggs fills the air. The man, as he came out of what appeared to be an almost trance-like state, began talking about visions he saw about the end of the world, etc. He claimed to have seen an evil specter attired all in black. He had heard his name called from the woods. Smeltzer felt faint, and Dave Baker felt lightheaded. Stan Gordon and Stephen detected a sulfurous odor that none of the surroundings or equipment could supply. This is a very crazy Beck account from Gerald in Ohio. Gerald is a trucker doing long hauls. After making a delivery around midnight, he decided to drive back home to see his daughter. He did this about half the time, especially when he was within 200 miles of home. Otherwise he would bed down at a way station or occasionally a cheap motel. He had been on the road for a little over 2 hours and decided to stop and get an early breakfast. He pulled into a truck stop diner that was still open, with that charming promise of eat here, get gas, always worth a chuckle. Gerald entered the restaurant and noticed the lights seemed to be especially dim. The sign said open, but he saw no one. Finally, a waitress came from the back. She greeted him, and the 2 spent a couple of minutes in light conversation. She seemed very bright and knowledgeable, so much so that Gerald inquired if she was from a trucker family, since she had an extremely good understanding of routes, but she told him no, that she was an army brat and had done a bit of traveling in her day. This is from a girl who looked 17 in a bad light. She took his order and went back to the kitchen. At this point, the driver realized that the situation was a little peculiar. A teenage waitress being the only person in the restaurant? He said he waited around 20 minutes, trying to think of a slick way to ask her for her number. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Not only was she just smart in general, but he felt that they connected, that she knew him. She guessed his birth date and year, and she seemed very intuitive. This wasn't what bothered him. What kept nagging him was how, When he ordered a chicken fried steak, she informed him, "You can't have that, it's fried in peanut oil." Gerald was deathly allergic to peanuts, but he never told her that. The more he thought about it, the more perplexed he became. Finally he decided to go back and ask the young lady how she could possibly know about his allergy. And here I will let him tell the story in his words. "So I got up and went to the back, where there was a little office for the manager, you know. I knocked on the door, kind of soft at first, then harder. I knocked 3 different times, but I got no answer. I gently pushed the door open slightly, as I did not wish to interrupt her if she was changing, and I found her standing with her back to me. 'Mrs.' I called, at which point she turned around. 'Mrs.' I say, and then she turned around. I freaked. Her eyes were totally black, there was no white visible at all. Her skin was so dry, her olive, my emphasis, complexion was full of cracks, not wrinkles, mind you, but cracked skin like you see on chapped lips, you know? She was all dried out like a mummy, and her mouth was stretched. Her mouth was stretched wider than anyone I've ever seen. It was way too wide to be normal, it seemed like she was grinning ear to ear, literally. Then she let out this, inhuman sound. She made a sound that was similar to a coyote's yip, but with a deeper tone. I took off so fast that I forgot to pick up my keys. They were sitting on top of my logbook. But when I got to my rig, they were sitting right there on the front seat. I know for damn sure I never leave my logbook in the cab. I looked up at the diner, and I could see her moving from one spot to the next. Her movements were so swift that they appeared almost blurry, akin to a hummingbird flapping its wings. I think she had that same look on her face, like it was frozen. I decided to get the hell out of there. I started my rig and rolled to the exit. I looked into the sleeping area, and there she was, that smiling devil girl. I tried to take off, but I forgot to look. Nearly hit a state trooper, and then she was gone. The trooper seemed, from that angle, looking out the door, I could see a wall and the banister surrounding the area above the stairs. I was deeply engrossed in my game, my gaze was fixed downwards, but suddenly, perhaps due to a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye, I raised my gaze and glanced in the direction of the door. That's when I saw it. From the left side of the doorframe, a figure slowly started to emerge. It must have been over a meter tall, but no taller than 1.5 meters. It had a strange color, not the figure itself, but rather an aura surrounding it, a mix between purple and celadon. Floating in the air, it was maybe 0.5 meters off the ground, hard to say exactly. As a kid sitting on the floor, I had to look up slightly. It had bent legs and a bit of a hunch, and in that position it slowly drifted to the right through the air. I don't remember what it was wearing exactly, but I know it had clothes, purple for sure, pants and black leather shoes. It looked like a formal outfit. It appeared to be male. I remember it had a fairly large head, so big it looked disproportionate to the rest of its body, with a black mop of hair and big ears. The facial features were difficult to tell, I saw it from the profile, definitely very prominent cheekbones and a big nose. I froze for about 3 seconds. I couldn't move, I was in shock. Then a wave of chills hit me, and fear took over. I immediately looked back down at the Lego bricks and started pretending to play. In my head I was thinking, just pretend you're playing, maybe it won't notice you. Pretend you didn't see it. But after a few seconds, I couldn't process what I had just seen or even whether I had seen something or if it was just my imagination. I might have believed it was all in my head to this day, if not for what happened next. Curiosity won out, and I looked up again, without lifting my head too much because I was afraid it might still be there. And then I saw that from the right side of the doorframe, part of the figure was still visible. After a short moment, it completely moved out of view. I was stunned, terrified. I sat there for a while, trying to gather the courage to run to my parents, who were in the living room downstairs. When I finally managed to do it, I ran out of the room, not looking to the right out of fear that it was still there, bolted down the stairs, and sat on the couch next to my parents. I didn't say a word to them. I just took comfort in the feeling of safety, and I was scared they wouldn't take me seriously. I didn't have the strength to try and explain it to them, because the emotions I had just gone through had completely drained me. That thing never even looked at me. It was like I didn't know I had seen it. I didn't tell any of my friends at school either, as I didn't want to be laughed at. For the next few days, I felt uneasy any time I played in my room, afraid I'd see it again. It took years before I told anyone, usually after a few drinks, and only in vague terms, just saying I'd seen something I couldn't explain, without going into detail, so I wouldn't sound like a weirdo. Has anyone else ever encountered something like this? Was it just my imagination? What keeps bothering me is that when I looked again, it was still there. Without that second look, I would have thought it was just my imagination. I saw strange things as a kid. This incident occurred in Wyoming, during the early to mid-2010s, to be precise. Although I remain uncertain about my experience, I am confident that it was not a dream or hallucination, contrary to what others have told me. I was 5 to 7 at the time, and I had my room with a closet that led to the attic and a door to the hallway next to it. I arranged my bed so that the closet and door were to my left. I remember I woke up and weirdly wanted to go to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I had never wanted to do that in the middle of the night to my or my parents' knowledge. I began to get up off my bed when a voice strongly told me to go back to bed. I felt terrified, and it kept repeating, "Go to bed, stay in bed, and don't get up." Then it stopped. I found myself buried under my covers, my eyes peeping out into the hallway. For some reason I felt I needed to look out into the hallway. And when I did, I saw a tall, dark, and unnaturally skinny figure walk past my room. I heard thuds of footsteps, almost like boots, as it moved, but I didn't see it walking. The hallway wasn't illuminated much, but I left my closet light on because I was scared of the dark, and that light lit up the small portion of hallway outside my door. I felt a deep fear of whatever walked past my door, and I don't know what told me to stay put, but I think it was protecting me. The voice was powerful/deep and sounded like a man. In that same house, we had a playroom in the basement opposite the downstairs living room and bar. In the middle of the two was the laundry room. This happened when I was a bit older, probably 7 to 9. I walked down the stairs and glanced offhandedly at the playroom. The light was off. I turned to the right and talked with my dad, who was watching TV in the living room, and then I went back to the stairs. I looked at the playroom again, and the light was on. It freaked me out, and I ran back to my dad, who thought I was just messing around. I have no clue what any of that was, but I keep having offhand paranormal things occur, and while I'm always paranoid about it, I've always found the paranormal interesting too. If anybody could explain what happened, that would be cool. I know I was young, but I also have felt convinced that this really happened ever since it did happen. Nothing was seen, but it was there. Okay, I don't know what's true here. All I can say is my encounter happened, it was real, and it's one of my favorite stories. Alright, here we go. I was staying with a girlfriend of mine while I was in college. She lived just north of Solomon's Island in southern MD. Interestingly, she resides at the top of a ravine in the middle of the woods. She didn't have neighbors for about half a mile in each direction. It was late on a random Saturday at the beginning of the summer. I say late, but it was really early, probably about 2:30 or 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to roll a blunt and go outside, sit on the deck, and read and listen to music. It was really nice out, so I figured, why not? Her porch/patio was big and had an outside light that shined about 30 feet to the edge of the woods, where it stopped and the night took over. As I sat and enjoyed my book, music, and perfectly pearled gilly, I began to notice something. You know when you have your headphones in and you can still hear external sound? Well, I kept hearing a rustling. It sounded like leaves rustling, but every time I hit pause and looked, the sound went away. This went on for about 5 or 6 more times until I had enough. I knew I heard it, I wasn't crazy. So I paused the music and put the headphones in. As soon as I did see it, it was the rustling. I shot up and looked at its origin. Still nothing in sight, the sound remained. I expected to see a squirrel or a rabbit scurrying about, but nothing. And the longer I listened, I realized that it was not the only thing nearby. There were 3. They were all moving in perfect harmony, just beyond the reach of the light. Again, at first I figure squirrels, rabbits, or maybe even a raccoon, given the hour. But the next part is what changed my whole perspective. As I stood there staring into the abyss trying to find the origin of all the mild ruckus, an acorn flew past my head. At first I thought, oh, it fell. No. They were being thrown from the darkness. Now I think I should share that I love monsters. All of them. So I wasn't turning tail to go inside and hide. My mind was racing. OMG, OMG Bigfoot. It is all that I could think. So I started picking up the acorns and throwing them back. Trying to escalate the situation, you know, and hoping I can catch a glimpse. After about 5 minutes I grew tired of our game and wanted to test the boundaries. Started off the porch with a spare golf club in my hand from my girlfriend's brother's set and headed for the woods. Now most people that spend any amount of time in the woods will tell you that there's always sound in the woods. Nothing. Not a ducking sound. It truly was a deafening silence. No crickets, no breeze, no bugs. There are no crickets, breezes, or bugs present. The only time this happens is when a predator is nearby. I'm an experienced hunter, and I know everything that could be in those woods. Nothing would make it that quiet. A feeling of dread washed over me when all sound left. It was like those moments when time slows down before an accident. But I pushed on because, hell, I'd come this far, no time to puss out now. I started to move closer to the front of the house, walking up the lane, when I was alerted to one of the wildest roars I've ever heard. Foxes will make a sound that resembles a woman's scream. This ducking thing was otherworldly. I sounded like a mixture of a human scream coupled with a silverback roar covered in bare bass. Nothing makes that sound. Every hair on my body stood up. I had never in my life heard something so grotesque and inhuman. The worst part was that it was about 30 yards away in the woods. I'm sure you're watching my every move. So without turning my back to the woods, I slowly crept back to the house, locking the door behind me. I tried to tell my girlfriend, but she thought I was just high. Pot doesn't make you hallucinate, and I'm a pothead, so one blunt is nothing. It was real, it happened. I just don't know what it was. Does anyone else out there have an idea? I'd love to hear what you think. Encounter with malnourished being near my university in the middle of the night. Any insight? So this is something that happened to me about 2 years ago at my friend's house. She lived right across a fairly busy 2-lane road from the parking lot on our college campus. I say this because the tall lights in the parking lot come into play later. The house has a bay window in front of it that spans almost the entire front side. In front of this window is a small porch, without railings, and a 2-person porch swing. Inside the window is the living room, which has a huge sectional couch. And covering the front window is a thin purple tapestry. You can see silhouettes through it but can't make out features. Her front yard is about 20 feet long with tall bushes lining the sidewalk, and the side of her property has 5 tiny evergreen-looking trees that are about 6 feet tall. Now that you have a makeshift diagram, allow me to explain my encounter with whatever it was. The other 5 people in the house were asleep, and it was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to smoke a cigarette because I couldn't sleep. I'm sitting on the front swing, and I hear rustling. I figured it was literally any type of animal and ignored it. But then, I heard what sounded like something on 2 legs shuffle through the leaves on the sidewalk at a rapid pace. You can recreate the sound by doing a quick shuffle without lifting your feet off the ground. Now I'm alert. I think I even said "what the duck" out loud. So I stand up, still smoking my cigarette, and look over at the right side of the property with the tiny evergreen-esque bushes. The sound trailed from the left to the right of the property. As mentioned earlier, the parking lot is across the street. The tall lights are on at all hours, so they illuminate from behind, leaving me to only see silhouettes. I see something that may have been about 4 feet tall. It looked like it would be a little shorter than my chest height. I am 5 feet 4 inches. And it was peeking out at me, like it was curious, but I also felt like it was malicious because I got this overwhelming sense of dread and fear. We stared at each other for what felt like 3 solid minutes. I felt like I was in a trance. The best way to describe the thing I saw would be like it was proportioned but malnourished. Someone once suggested that it might be a midget. I apologize if that term is not politically correct, but I know for a fact it was not. This thing was very thin and perfectly proportioned, like a thin and sickly child. I guess it kind of looked like that little guy from the Lord of the Rings movies. I looked down at my cigarette for no more than a second, and when I looked back up, it was gone. I heard movement, and I said, "Duck this," and ran inside and locked the door behind me. Then, sitting on the couch, I was staring at the window when I suddenly saw something run across, blocking a portion of the light from the parking lot as it went by. For it to do this, it had to have been on the porch where I just was. So that's basically my experience. Thank you for listening. It feels so great to get the word out. I would love some insight on what you guys think. And just in case anyone believes it's an animal, the area was in South New Jersey, fairly rural, and about 10 minutes away from the Pine Barrens. No, I don't think the beast was the Jersey Devil. I'm just giving geographic information. I grew up on an Indian reservation, and we used to go skinwalker hunting. We usually saw some weird, hunched-over looking creatures running in the dark. The most memorable sighting was near a lake. We built a fire facing the water and heard noises in the brush behind us. We got up to investigate with a handheld spotlight and came face to face with a 3-4 tall humanoid creature that didn't have any discernible features. Like it looked like globs of flesh in a pile on its body. Its arms were elongated, akin to those of an ape, and it maintained an upright posture. It stayed in the spotlight for about 3 seconds, let out a really weird cackle, and darted off. I don't think it was a skinwalker, but it was a really weird creature. The easiest way to describe its color is fleshy, like many types of flesh colors all loosely patched on the creature's frame. What could this be? I shared this experience online, and someone said it could be a Wendigo? But I researched a little on them and don't see how that could be so. Do you have any ideas? I moved from California to Western New York to live with my boyfriend, and we moved into our own place. It's a very nice area, so I would say I live without huge fear of anything really happening. We work nights, but I am currently laid off due to COVID. My boyfriend still works, though, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. So I am awake and alone during these hours, with my dog and 2 cats. It started off as knocks on my back door, always coming from the back door, that I would sometimes get scared of, but I just passed them off as wind. One day, as I was playing PS4 online in a party chat, I heard a lady sobbing outside. I tell my friends, and they tell me not to open the door, believing it could be a human trafficking trick. So I crawl to the window and peek outside only to find nobody out there. So we joke that my backyard is haunted and all that. But I don't think much of it, I eventually forget about it. This one stands out to me because I almost ran outside. I was on the phone with my family as my boyfriend was leaving for work. He usually lets the dog out before he leaves, and sometimes she doesn't come back in immediately. This is important because she has escaped from our yard as my boyfriend leaves, and we have to chase her down the block to catch her. So while I'm on the phone, I clearly hear my boyfriend yell the F-bomb. I immediately think, oh no, the dog escaped. So I hang up the phone and rush to the door. But I realize his car is gone, so I just stand confused and call him. Me, hey, what happened? Did Ruby, dog, get out? BF, no, she's inside. Why do you think that? Me, I just heard you yell outside. BF, oh, that's weird. No, I'm like a few blocks away right now. I was left extremely confused, as I've never experienced that. I keep hearing things since then, knocks, bangs, and even meowing once. But I ignore them all because I don't want to go outside. Whoever or whatever it is wants me outside, I guess. Around 3:30 a.m. today, my boyfriend left early and arrived home while I was washing dishes, preventing me from giving him a welcome back hug. He went upstairs to get changed, and I continued doing my thing. I then hear him at the back door saying, hello. For a moment I'm thinking he is outside the door and needs me to unlock and open it. But I quickly realize he is upstairs. So I freeze and immediately call him as I am scared and confused. He tells me he didn't say hello and that he is in the bathroom. I slowly walked away from the kitchen to the opposite side of the house, and I was shaking hard. It was definitely his voice and rhythm. Whatever it was, it mimicked his voice perfectly. I am even shaking now, TBH. Nothing else has happened, as now the sun is out, but I do worry about tomorrow and every night after that. I luckily am not getting hurt by it or anything, but it's just very scary to experience. And it is honestly giving me some anxiety now every time I open that door. One of my friends has told me to get my house blessed, although nothing ever happens in the house, it's only in my backyard. I was also told to put nickels on the windowsill or something like that. I don't know if I'm going crazy in imagining this. I wouldn't believe it could be that, though, because it doesn't happen when I'm thinking about it. It happens at random moments when I'm too busy doing something to be able to imagine it. I'm not on any medications, I don't drink or do drugs. I have searched the internet for similar information, but I haven't found anything. Alien Ape Man. This brief but memorable encounter with an ostensibly extraterrestrial being has all of the earmarks of a prototypical Bigfoot sighting, making this case one of the strangest and most perplexing accounts to have come down the crypto pike in decades. Sometime in 1965, in the wee hours of the morning, an anonymous male teenager was alone in his parents' home not far from the allegedly Sasquatch-infested region of Madras, Oregon. The young man was enjoying a peaceful evening when he suddenly heard a cacophonous din emanating from outside his home. The former teen would share his story on a site in June of 2002. When I was a teenager living in Oregon, I had a scary experience that I will never forget. My mom and stepdad went out. I heard a strange noise outside. Startled, yet infused with the bravado of youth, the teenager lunged up and looked through the window to see what he later described as a UFO coming down. I saw strange lights outside on the ground. It was at that moment that the youngster realized that the unsettling sound he heard was radiating from the oddly illuminated UFO. It was then that this already disconcerting incident would take a turn toward the terrifying. The teen then glanced towards his open front door to see a looming, silhouetted, primate-like figure filling the frame. This hulking beast silently stared at the isolated, unarmed, and almost certainly petrified youth for what must have felt like an eternity. The young man would go on to describe the traumatic incident. I saw an alien creature standing outside the front door looking at me. It had the face of an ape and a chain across the chest area. While many folks living in the Pacific Northwest are no strangers to encounters with anomalous ape-like animals, very rarely are these hairy hominids associated with flying saucers, and almost never are these creatures described as being adorned in any way with clothing, chains, or any other accoutrements. The fact that this ape appeared in conjunction with a UFO landing and seemed to be clad in what might be some kind of Planet of the Apes-style regalia forces us to consider the possibility that this entity might have been the pilot of this evidently extraterrestrial vehicle or, at the very least, a passenger. This Bigfoot-like space invader then vanished as swiftly as it appeared, no doubt leaving the baffled teen to wonder what the heck had just happened. And whether or not it was coming back. After what must have been a sleepless night? The young man mustered up the courage to go outside and inspect his yard the following morning. Claimed to have discovered an impression in the ground where the UFO landed. Unfortunately, if any photos or sketches were made at the scene, they've been lost to time. As strange as this alien ape-man occurrence may seem at face value, there are more than a few Bigfoot researchers who feel that there is some sort of connection between the UFO phenomenon and that of NAPES, a phrase that was coined in the 1960s by renowned cryptozoologist Loren Coleman for North American apes, but any evidence linking these two enigmas is tenuous at best. Some have suggested that extraterrestrials utilize hairy hominids in everything from search and rescue to scouting and resource missions. Others surmise that these colossal ape-like entities are the aliens' beloved pets and that Earth serves as a sort of giant planetary pet park wherein these creatures can walk, feed, bathe, breed, frolic, and, of course, eliminate waste so as not to sully the flying saucer during the long interstellar cruise back home. Still others believe that these two equally enthralling phenomena have nothing to do with one another. They hypothesize that Bigfoot is just as indigenous to good old Mother Earth as her human cousins, and when UFOs show up, these astonishingly bright animals are just as perplexed as we are regarding their origins or intentions. Being a fanatic for both sci-fi movies and comic books, I can't help but secretly wish that this likely extraterrestrial visitor was in reality an intergalactic, quasi-simian, criminal mastermind, kind of like a synthesis of King Kong and Hannibal Lecter, or maybe more akin to the perennial Flash nemesis Gorilla Grodd, whose interplanetary prison barge accidentally crash-landed on Earth, breaking his titanium space chains. Thus unleashing this otherworldly villain on our unsuspecting world, until, of course, a pair of alien bounty hunters with an astonishing array of future weapons came down to save this pale blue orb and retrieve this psychotic uber ape, dead or alive. But then again, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool geek. Bright, purple orb. This isn't exactly a humanoid encounter, but I'm not entirely sure where to categorize this. I figured this would be a good place, since I've seen a multitude of different topics discussed. So this story takes place when I was in around 8th to 9th grade in a little neighborhood near Claremore, Oklahoma. My neighborhood was awesome, in a wooded area near a field with a few cows. It had friendly neighbors, great scenery, and an easy road for taking walks. Anyway, the neighborhood road took the shape of a figure 8, with a small segment connecting to the highway. The houses nestled within the squares of the figure 8 and extended beyond its perimeter. My house was located on the cross-section of figure 8, so I could see the road behind it, to the side of the house, and in front of me, of course. One evening, as dusk was approaching, I happened to look out of my living room window, and my gaze fixed on the road behind my house. Between my neighbor and me, I could see bits of that road. I continued to look out of the window, and I happened to see a peculiar, purple light traveling down the road. At first, I thought this must have been someone on a bicycle. Now, this cross-section road had a hill toward the end of it. As I watched this light, I could tell it wasn't a person, because the light didn't bob up and down to match a person's gait. As the light traveled down the hill, I thought it odd that it wouldn't increase in speed. I would say it was probably traveling at a consistent pace of around 5 to 7 miles per hour. So essentially, the same pace as a person running. As the light rounded the corner toward my street, I continued to watch it from my living room window until I could no longer view it from there. When I couldn't view it, I went to my office window and watched it through the blinds as it made the final bend onto my street. The feeling from watching this light must have felt similar to a fish entranced by an anglerfish light. It was small, and the light was a mix of bright purple and white light. For whatever reason, being older, I feel like this was stupid of me. I decided it would be a great idea to go outside. So I did. My house had its sidewalk, and the exterior wall of the office shielded the entryway and a small portion of the sidewalk from view. By this point, the light was about to make its final bend onto my street, and I was watching from my sidewalk. As it made the turn to go onto my street, I moved to the driveway. It had a giant slope, and thought it would be best to hide behind the pine tree next to my driveway. This was a baby pine tree, by the way, so I'm watching this light from my vantage point, and although I can't exactly remember what all my thoughts were at the time, I remember clearly thinking about what the light was attached to. As it got closer, it was more apparent that the light wasn't attached to a bike at all, much less anything else. Now, this is the part that gives me chills. The ditches at each yard's edges are therefore rather deep. My brother, friends, and I would often jump these ditches with our bikes, and even on foot, a person would need to take a pretty big step to get across it. So the light approached my yard and went over the ditch. I was pretty freaked out at this point because 1. Clearly there was no one attached to this light, as it smoothly glided over the ditch, and 2. Its approach toward my vantage point meant that whatever this was knew my location. As the light started to cross the driveway towards me, my fight or flight response kicked in, and I ran. We had a chain-link fence around the backyard for my dogs to play in, and it was around 5 feet high. I guess I had so much adrenaline that I did this Mario-esque wall jump right over the fence and hightailed it inside. When I got inside, my parents were a little alarmed that I seemed so shaken up, but when we went back outside to search for the light, there was no trace of it. To this day, I have no idea about what it was. Occasionally I wonder how I would react if I encountered it again. I also wonder if anyone else has encountered something similar. Pale white aliens/beings? So I was listening to another person's story about an experience they had as a kid, and it occurred to me I had experienced something very strange as a kid and never really was able to find out what happened. So there aren't a lot of details, but when I was a kid, my family and I saw this weird thing that looked like a person outside our window, but they didn't really look like a human. Physiologically they looked human, as in they had 2 legs and 2 arms, so a humanoid figure. It was late in the middle of the night, like maybe 2 a.m. Their skin was white, coincidentally almost like the aliens in the movie Prometheus, but much whiter, like white-out level white. They also wore a very white gown, matching their skin color almost exactly. The gown covered everything except for their head and hands. The figure was also completely bald. It also didn't look transparent or anything, so it didn't appear to be a ghost. They had a solid body. It didn't do anything, it was just standing there outside in the middle of the night. They were maybe like 30 to 40 meters away from our window underneath these light posts. It was a pretty secluded area where hardly anyone would pass through during the day, much less at night. I also can't remember seeing it walk to its location or away. They were just there. They didn't appear to be looking directly at us, but they were facing in our general direction, perhaps slightly away from us. Has anyone ever heard or seen of such a thing? I remember being freaked out when it happened, and I suppose my memory has suppressed it by making me think it was just a person who painted their skin with white paint. Thinking about it now, it doesn't really make sense. Why would a person do all this and hang out outside when most likely nobody was going to see them? We certainly would not have seen them had we been asleep. I had a dream about a humanoid creature attempting to enter the house. Woke to a handprint on the outside glass as well as the leaves disturbed in exactly the right place. It's been about 10 days since this happened, and I've been debating whether or not to mention it anywhere because maybe it's nothing. I'm just curious if anyone has any opinions. I don't usually remember my dreams, but the other night I dreamed that something was trying to get inside my house. It wasn't the most frightening creature but definitely not adorable at all. It looked like a small man, maybe 3 to 4 feet tall, covered in patchy hair. He behaved oddly, almost like he was really drunk, and asked if he could come inside. He was not standing but rather lying down in front of my steps, somewhat writhing around. I responded in the negative. I said no. I was sorry I couldn't help him, but I don't allow strangers to come inside my house. He said something like, then I'll just have to find a way inside. So I closed and locked the door. That morning I woke up 3x, and each time the clock said 7 a.m. I thought that was sort of strange but told myself that dreams can be weird like that. Then I opened the curtains on the window to let the sunlight in, and there was a large handprint on the outside of the window. To be honest, I experienced a slight panic. I touched the glass to make sure it was on the outside. There's a big bush underneath that window, and in addition, a temporary fence because the flowers are poisonous, and also delicious, to our dog. There's a chain-link fence around the backyard. There is very little chance that someone touched the window recently. There was no sign of anyone being close enough to touch it. The fence and bush were undisturbed. It's definitely possible for a random spot to show up on a window, so I figured I'd wait until the next day and check it again to see if it was just something that was happening now that it's getting colder at night. It was not the same the next day or any of the following. That was the only morning a handprint appeared, except for a very vague impression the following morning, which I assume was left over from the previous day. It has disappeared. Another thing that disturbed me was that we had recently finished raking the leaves, but I left a small pile up against the house in case my toddler threw a fit about not having any left to jump in. In the dream the man had been at the bottom of the steps where the leaves were. Before I took the dog out, I said to myself, if that leaf pile is disturbed, I'm going to be freaked out. And then they were. That's the exact same place where the man was lying in my dream. It seems consistent with his size as well. I get that leaves can blow around. Obviously. I don't think an animal would have done it. It's bigger than a cat, and we aren't aware of any stray dogs. It doesn't really seem like the wind would have blown the leaves away from one small specific spot like that, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Man recalls years of abductions. Location of encounters, Thunder Bay in London, Ontario. Dates of encounters, latest, August 14, 2015, and several years before. Description: about 8 years or so ago I reported a UFO in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada, at Trowbridge Falls Campground. That was the first time I reported a UFO sighting. But it was not the first time I witnessed one. I have quite an experience that I want to share, but I am scared. I am an engineer for an underground mining operation outside Thunder Bay. I have a lot of people's lives depending on me being of sound mind and character every day. However, there have been some circumstances that have been brought to my attention tonight. Something that proves what I have been going through since I was a child is true. All of this will be much easier to explain over the phone. Because I am still coming to terms with it right now, I will go into a little bit more detail. When I was a kid in London, Ontario, I remember walking home one evening from a friend's house around the corner. It was summer. 2 kids older than me were walking by me. I could tell they were panicked. I heard them say, "I can't believe it, it's a spaceship." Curious, I asked them what they were talking about, and they pointed up. There was a large round UFO in the sky with smaller round crafts flying around it. I don't know how big it was, but I remember being frightened because of how it looked. The small crafts around it are what we now call orbs. I remember them being red. I was so scared that I ran up the street to my house. I told my mother and my stepfather about it, but they played it off as no big deal. I had sleep paralysis that night. I remember it clearly because it was the first time it happened. There were dark figures next to my bed. I was lifted into the air, and I remember literally bouncing off my mattress as if I was dropped from my ceiling. I woke up and ran out of my room into my parents' and slept in there. I was having dreams of aliens every night, but I don't think they were dreams. Since that night I have had encounters with ET my entire life. Now this sounds nuts, I know. But tonight I was talking to my mother on the phone. The conversation went like this. "Did your wife tell you what happened to me last night?" I said, "She told me you had a night terror." She said, "I think it's more than that. Ever since you were born, I have been having something happen to me." Somehow I knew what she was going to say. She said she wakes up paralyzed and can feel something getting into bed with her. And last night she finally was able to remember its face. She said it was a tan-colored alien. My blood ran cold, because I know exactly what she was talking about. I asked her to Google gray alien, and she told me that is what it is. She told me she has been having encounters since before I was born. When she found out she was pregnant with me, she told me she woke up in the middle of the night terrified and felt someone grab her hand and hold it tight. She said even though she was scared and couldn't see who it was, she felt it was to comfort her. She also went into detail about when I had my first encounter in London, that her and my stepdad were on the couch watching TV. When they awoke in the morning, they had no memory of the previous night, and the house appeared to have undergone a thorough renovation. It was like there was a fight and things were thrown all over. She said it happens at least once a year or so that she wakes up in the middle of the night unable to move and that there is something in the room in the bed with her. While I was at work today, she touched on this with my wife. I can forward you the text messages if you would like, but she went into greater detail with me. I told her that I still have experiences and that I cannot sleep without a light on nearby, and I told her some things that have happened to me that my wife has witnessed, and now my daughter. In February of this year, my 7-year-old daughter and I were outside at about 8 p.m. in the yard playing in the snow. There was a buzzing sound, like an electrical sound. She said to me, "We have to go inside, the people in the plane are coming." I shook my head no, because I knew that sound. I have woken up to it in my home during sleep paralysis. I didn't say what I was thinking. But we came in the house, and I asked her to draw me a picture of the people in the plane. I felt tears in my eyes when she drew it because I knew right then that she was going through what I did at her age. She drew a picture of a gray alien, along with a symbol she claimed to have seen. I was cautious in my questions. I asked her if she was telling me the truth, even though I already knew she was. I took a picture of what she drew. I asked her when she had seen it. She told me a lot, and that one time she went with it because I told her it was all right. I was very confused and concerned when she said this. I asked, "What do you mean?" and assured her that everything was fine. She said I was with them. I know this sounds insane, and I am sorry for such a long story. Thank you for listening. Did I trigger something? A few years ago, I and my friend, we'll name him Jaden, went to this park in his neighborhood at night with flashlights and whatnot, since Jaden told me he always feels like something's watching him there. The park had this little roof with steps leading up to it and 2 slides, that was it. When we got there at about 11:30 or so, we walked up to the top part of the little park, and as he told me, it felt like something was watching us. I, being the scaredy cat I was, chickened out and walked down the little steps. He followed down with me, calling me all these dumb little names until I felt something touch my shoulder. I shined my light behind myself, and to my surprise, there was nothing there. We heard something on the roof of the playground, so we shined our lights up at the top of it and saw this weird, tall, semi-humanoid figure standing on top of it, and it didn't really go away like you'd think it would until we started running back to Jaden's house. After that, we've constantly felt like we're being watched, seeing that weird figure everywhere we go at night and hearing noises and weird stuff happening to us. 1996, Eastern Canada, encounter with Sandown Clown. At 5, I encountered, spoke to, and physically touched the Sandown Clown. At the time of the event, I was 4 or 5 years old, and the sun was beginning to descend, so it was late afternoon at best. My memory of what happened sticks out because it would shape the things I would draw as I grew older. I was sitting on a large boulder in my grandparents' backyard. It had been dug out some time before me to make way for a large decorative fish pond that, by my time, was rarely used except to entertain me. My grandfather had just gone inside, and I knew enough to not go swimming in the gross water. It was currently I heard a noise to my right and turned. To the right of my grandparents' home was the neighbor's massive field. I can't remember what crop they grew, but the tall grass at the time probably means it hadn't been used in a while. Standing in the grass was a figure with a scarecrow pose. The figure stood with his arms out and his body straight. His hat was cone-shaped, his facial features wooden. He had a jack-o'-lantern face with an empty nose hole, but he still looked alive. But when he talked, his mouth didn't move. I could hear him in my head, like telepathy. He gave off major clown vibes, which I was comfortable with, as both parents did charity events as clowns. I would say he was roughly 6 to 7 feet tall with wide shoulders. He wore scarecrow clothes, with patches of bright colors over pale brown and black. But he told me that your podcast reminded me that I wasn't the only one who had seen him, and that a vivid experience could have been something more sinister. He waved a wooden hand, and I heard a voice say, "Hello, Sam. We are all colors?" I remember distinctly that he asked it as a question, and I responded with, "My name is Luke, not Sam." I wasn't scared, I felt calm and relaxed until the end of the encounter. He pointed at himself and did a short bow, then reached out into the field next to him and opened a door. No one had ever seen the door before, nor did it have any attachments. I could see inside the gap of the door, and the room inside was green, with wooden chairs. He motioned for me to come with him. I remember getting up off the boulder, walking with him through the door, and being enveloped by bright red and green Christmas lights. They were as bright as the sun, and I had to close my eyes to keep from going blind, or so I thought. I woke up lying on my grandparents' couch. It was dark outside, and my parents rushed in when I called out to them. They had found me half an hour before, asleep in the middle of the field, having called for me and not hearing me answer when things got dark. It was last year when I started hearing about the Sam the Sandown Clown encounter, and I remarked how similar it was to my encounter. I honestly believe they were either the same or slightly different entities as my encounter. As it's been months since my encounter appeared on the podcast, I've been able to deal better with the newer information connected to my experience. Sam didn't try any tricks with me, like with the children from the Isle of Man. Sam's voice was not audible in the usual way. It was like an echo hitting off something, and I heard that inside my head rather than through my ears. Thinking it over, I believe the full sentence was, "Hello, Sam. We are all colors?" Skip the starlight. The inside of the green room has come up again in my mind. I've tried remembering other details, and when I sat down and tried to nail down anything else about it, I distinctly recalled that there were 2 empty wooden chairs and 2 occupied chairs further back. The door was see-through, I never saw a doorknob. I couldn't see the other people in the chairs, but they had the same outline as Sam, the hat, the head shape, long arms, and legs. Details were indistinct and unclear. Like when someone's face gets blurred to protect their identity. I thought I would share my experience here, finally, as I feel much better about it than initially. Something weird at my school bus stop. Aliens/UFOs. When I was in 9th grade walking to the bus stop, Near St. Paul, Minnesota. It was still dark out and eerily calm, no traffic and very quiet, but the second I stepped onto the street from my driveway, it felt like there was some kind of mild static electricity in the air, if that makes sense. Anyways, my bus stop was half a block from my house on the corner, with one street light above it and some pine trees and shrubs that line the street. I was looking at the ground as I walked up the hill toward the bus stop, and just before I crossed the street, I finally looked up to see if the kid I shared this bus stop with was already there. He wasn't. Instead, standing directly under the streetlight was this maybe 3.5 feet tall alien. The alien turned its body towards me and gazed at me intently. I stopped in my tracks and stared for a second, paralyzed with fear. This thing was like 3.5 feet tall, with grayish/bluish/whitish skin. I could see blue veins under its skin, which seemed almost translucent or thin, with no clothing, no hair at all, and no noticeable genitalia. Its head was large with sort of a flattish top that became bulbous around the forehead area, tapered in a bit at the temple area, then bulbous at the cheekbone area, then tapered down to a flattish chin, and the eyes were larger and more spaced out than a human's eyes. I didn't see a nose, and the mouth was like a small slit, no lips enclosed. The arms were too long for its body and hung at its sides. I guess I didn't take note of its hands. It kind of had a flat chest with small pectoral muscles but no nipples, with a wider protruding lower stomach, wide-set hips, and short legs that looked more like how a hoofed animal stands on their hind legs but with humanoid feet. This thing just stood there under the street light facing me and staring at me, and only 20 to 30 feet away from me. I would guess I stood there for maybe 3 to 5 seconds staring at it, frozen with fear and confusion, trying to figure out what the duck I was staring at. When my brain caught up with me, I ran as fast as I could back home, slammed the door shut, and was inconsolably crying and hyperventilating. My parents were confused and horrified as to what happened to me in the 3 minutes I was gone. My mom had to help me walk to the nearest chair. I didn't go to school that day. My dad stayed home because I was too scared to be alone. After I calmed down, I took a nap and woke up 8 hours later to my mom when she got home from work. It felt like I had literally just closed my eyes, then opened them to my mom, who had worked an entire shift at work. This is long, and hopefully I explained it well enough. Scariest day of my life. Also, when my mom was a little kid, her early teens, she had several encounters, including abduction. She hates talking about it, but, my God, her stories are absolutely terrifying. My mom grew up as a farm girl in rural Y, who wouldn't make this shit up. My encounter with some very strange children, black-eyed kids. This happened about 5 years ago when I was 17. When I was a teen, I had been dating this guy, let's call him C, for a while. He was older and abusive, but I was young and stupid. Anyways, I was staying at his house, which was about an hour and a half away from my hometown, where I lived. I did something to piss him off, I can't remember what, but he ended up kicking me out of his house at 3 in the morning and didn't allow me enough time to grab shoes or socks, so I was barefoot. I didn't have a car and didn't know anyone in this town. Although I occasionally smoked weed with the neighbor kid, I didn't know them well enough to ask for help, and their dad really creeped me out. I also didn't have a phone at the time. I decide I'll walk to McDonald's, about a mile away, and call my dad to come pick me up. I didn't believe in anything paranormal and had a cocky I'm tough, no one can duck with me mentality, so I wasn't worried about walking alone at night, I was mostly just hurt and pissed right off. I got about 2 blocks away when I stepped on a big ass piece of glass and ducked myself up. At this point I'm bleeding, hurt, and tired. I decide I'll head back to C's and hope he's calmed down enough to let me back inside his house. This is when shit got ducking weird. I'm almost to C's, about 4 houses down the street, when I see them walking towards me in the middle of the road. There were 2 of them, one was about the size of an 8-year-old, and the other looked about the size of a small toddler. My first thought was, what the duck are kids doing out this late? They have some shit parents. That's when I felt it, an immense amount of fear built up in me, and I stepped behind a parked truck on the street. I don't know why, but I didn't want them to see me. From behind the truck, I watched them. They weren't moving normally, the best way I can describe it, is they looked like they were walking with broken legs. Their gait was weird and jerky. That's when I noticed their arms. They were moving them really weirdly. It was inhuman, they were twisting their limbs around and moving them in ways a normal person wouldn't be able to. I was sufficiently freaked out, and they were still walking towards me. I was scared. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I just stood behind the truck and watched them. Then they stopped for what felt like forever. I could swear they were looking at me, but I can't know for sure. All I could see were their silhouettes. And then, they just turned around and walked away, in their bizarre way, around the street corner and disappeared from sight. At this point, I'm rationalizing and have convinced myself I just saw some kids being weird as shit. I make my way to C's door and knock. He refuses to answer. Duck. Okay, well, I'm not walking anywhere far with this foot. So I decide to go to the park across the street, right across from C's house. There was a small neighborhood park with a single swing set. I sit on the swings, building up anger and trying to figure out what to do. Am I going to have to sleep in this ducking park? And then I hear whistling. Okay. Probably just C's weird neighbor. He was always up really late, smoking weed in his garage. So I figure he's trying to catch my attention because sometimes I hung out with his son and smoked. I walk over to his garage, and it's dark inside. What? I knock, no answer. Okay, so it wasn't him. I hear the whistle again. This is a human whistle, BTW, I think at least. Didn't sound like a bird or something, and start looking around the whole neighborhood, looking for someone in their front yard or something. I walk around the sidewalk looking at houses. Nothing. Strangely enough, I return to the swing set. And then I hear it right behind me. I didn't even look back. I ran straight to C's and started banging on his door, tears streaming down my face. C answers this time, and I frantically explain the whole ordeal. He grabs a bat and runs out the door. He went to look for the kids or whoever was doing the whistling. He couldn't find anyone. Later that night, we were sitting on his floor, rolling cigarettes. We were poor, when we both heard the laughter of multiple children. It sounded like it was coming from the window. He ran outside, and of course nothing was there. I was ducking shitted, though. We heard it again one more time that night, and that was that. I never experienced anything paranormal again and broke up with C shortly after. For the first few weeks after the encounter, I stopped going outside at night. However, over the years, I've rationalized it away as just kids ducking around. C suggested drunk midgets. Like I said, I don't really believe in the paranormal. But sometimes late at night, I remember those kids and have trouble sleeping. The way they were moving was just not right. I don't know how any person could move like that, and the sense of primal fear I felt is something I'll never forget. Someone online suggested black-eyed kids in their true form. What do you guys think? I had an experience with a flying monster as a child, which I recently found out I wasn't the only one to have. I was in middle school, waiting at the bus stop as the sun rose, around 12 or 13. I was mindlessly looking around when I caught a glimpse of something huge in a tall tree. It looked heavy-set, and I could make out wings. I saw it move a little, and I freaked out and set out to run, and then I saw the bus. When I turned around, the creature had vanished from sight. I concluded that I must have imagined it all. I was exhausted, it was early, whatever. Fast forward a few weeks, and it's about 9 p.m. and dark outside. I'm in my room watching TV when all of a sudden I hear banging on my window and yelling. I look out my window to see my best friend. I open the window, and like a crazy person, he climbs through, telling me to close it. It turns out he claimed to have seen something huge with wings in the park, and it was chasing him from the park. The park was a short walk from my house, less than 10 minutes. This is the last time I heard about the creature until my sister called me a month or so ago and was asking me about the creature I saw. I told her it was years ago. I don't remember a whole hell of a lot about it, and I figured I hallucinated it or just plain made it up. She starts telling me about a story her husband was telling her about a flying creature that chased him and his friends at that same park in the middle of the night. What he recounted seemed pretty accurate to my experience. To the best of my knowledge, the creature reminded me of a gargoyle. The creatures from hell. This recently happened to my friend, Joe, and me near Hell, Michigan. I had driven my Jeep Wrangler over to my friend's house about 15 miles west of Detroit at around noon because we intended to take the doors and top off and going out for a cruise to a restaurant we knew in Hell. We loaded everything into his garage and set off. We got to the restaurant around 4:30, and following federal regulations, I took my CZ-84 handgun from my waistband, unloaded it, and placed the weapon in my center console, which locks, and the magazine in my glove box, which also locks, since I'm not allowed to carry a concealed weapon into any restaurant that serves alcohol. Around 8 in the evening, the place was starting to get pretty dead, so we decided to head home. I remember walking next door to a small party store and purchasing a pack of cigarettes and noticing that it was getting pretty dark outside. We climbed into the Jeep, and I unlocked my glove box and center console to retrieve my concealed carry and slid it into its holster. Joe wanted to drive around some more and jam some tunes on the radio, so I started heading south to kind of take us out of our way so the ride back would take a bit longer. At this point, night had fallen, and we were traveling down a dirt road when we came upon 2 cars parked in the middle of the street with their lights and engines off. I parked about 30 yards back, flashed my high beams a few times, and was beginning to get a bit nervous and impatient. I could have driven around the cars if the road had not been flanked by tall trees on either side. I turned to my friend, "Let's check this place out." He replied in the affirmative and rolled out of the passenger door. I pulled my mini-mag flashlight out of my belt loop and started walking toward the two vehicles. As I got closer, I drew my gun. The first car was stopped at an angle, with the nose just barely in front of the second car. It almost looked like the vehicle on the left had made the other car pull over. I found this to be very perplexing, as there were no houses nearby and the most scenic thing around here was trees. I checked both cars with my flashlight and found no traces of anyone in either vehicle, so I turned to my friend and said, "I think we should just turn around and get out of here. This stuff is creepy." He told me to stop whining because someone might be hurt, and we proceeded to call into the night around us. After 5 minutes of yelling, we walked back over to the Jeep. This is when things got really weird. The moment I turned on my flashlight, I could see a pale, thin, naked thing, I refused to call it human, peering at us from behind a tree. I got Joe's attention and tried to focus my eyes, thinking that it was a ghost burned into my retina from the flame of my lighter. Joe jumped backward at what he saw and spat out a string of curse words. As Joe yelled, it ducked back behind the tree to conceal itself. I tried to use some logic, thinking that maybe it was a person and they got scared because one guy shrieked and the other one was holding a small handgun. "Hey! Come on out here. Why is your car parked in the middle of the damned road?" I yelled. Upon receiving no reply, I approached Joe from behind and softly uttered, "It's time for us to leave this place." Then, the thing poked its head back around the tree to look at us, and I got a much better look. It didn't have any hair, was ghost white, and had a small, pushed-in nose with a wide mouth with black lips and black eyes. Joe quickly backed up, knocked me into the dirt, and I lost sight of it with my flashlight. At this point, I raised my pistol and clicked the flashlight back on. In the second or two that my beam was off, this thing had moved from 15 yards off the road to 10 feet in front of us without making a sound. Feeling very vulnerable lying on my back and paralyzed with fear, I didn't know what to say other than back the duck up. Now. Then the feeling faded away. I scrambled to my feet, shining the flashlight around me, thinking that it had just maneuvered itself around me at an extremely quick speed. Joe jumped to his feet and began rattling off at the mouth. I tucked the pistol under my arm, grabbed my key fob from my belt, and hit the unlock switch to turn my headlights on. We turned around 5 times in the light before deciding we had seen something otherworldly and should leave. We raced toward my Jeep. I threw the flashlight into the rear seats and handed Joe my pistol. As we were backing, I counted a half-dozen of these things walking toward the parked cars in the middle of the road. Panicked, I disengaged the clutch, stepped on the brake, and turned the wheel without bothering to look behind me. My car slid, and my plastic bumper hit a tree. The next main road I found, I turned quickly onto, just now bothering to click my safety belt into place and getting my handgun back from my friend. After about 5 miles or so, I noticed a gas station and pulled into it just so I could clear my mind and make my heart stop racing. All we could mutter was, "Did you see all those things?" We took the quick way back to his place, went inside, and locked the door behind us. We sat down and tried to come up with a logical explanation for what had just happened. Unfortunately, we couldn't think of any reason. They were trying to trap us by parking the 2 cars in the road to make it look like someone was in trouble. We haven't told anyone about that experience, but I'm forcing myself to share this because my friend Joe just called me at 3 o'clock in the morning, waking me up, telling me that he was going to let his puppy out the back door, but when he turned on the porch light, one of those things was in his backyard. I don't believe we're going on any late night drives anymore. I still have trouble falling asleep because all I can picture is that inhuman, evil face looking at me. Humanoids, the Zanfretta abductions. On the frigid night of December 6, 1978, night watchman Peter Zanfretta was on a routine patrol in the village of Torrelia when he stumbled into a series of terrifying encounters with extraterrestrial beings that would make him question everything he had come to believe about reality. Zanfretta's upsetting tale began when his car inexplicably lost power en route to a client's unoccupied home. The confused security man glanced through his window and spied 4 lights moving in the garden of the house he was coming to inspect. Assuming that the beams were emanating from the flashlights of prowlers, Zanfretta climbed from his car with his revolver and flashlight in hand. The watchman silently slipped through the gate and crept along a rock wall to get the jump on what he still assumed were ordinary burglars. Just as he prepared to leap out to confront these trespassers, he felt something touch his shoulder from behind. Zanfretta spun around, but instead of finding a human criminal, he saw an entity that he described as being an enormous, green, ugly, and frightful creature, with undulating skin. as though he were very fat or dressed in a loose, gray tunic. No less than 10 feet tall. Two similar beasts flanked the entity. Zanfretta would include more explicit descriptions of these beings, including hairy, greenish skin, horns on the sides of their faces, yellow, triangular eyes, and red veins embedded in their foreheads. He also described a unique, self-illuminated mechanical apparatus that fit over the Watchman claimed to have been confronted by these, and other, creatures numerous times, and giant footprints and other tangible pieces of evidence were even found at the scenes of these alleged abductions. So, that happened. 8 incredibly weird UFO encounters. Some UFO encounters are so incredibly weird that after they occur, people can hardly believe that they actually happened. This compilation presents 6 cases from across the world of truly high strangeness, each involving close encounters of the second kind, in which the environment is affected in some way. Many of these cases have multiple witnesses, and virtually all of them involve some form of evidence: radar confirmation, photographs, landing traces, physiological effects, animal reactions, or electromagnetic disturbances. These cases are indisputable. 1. A UFO collides into a house. On April 23, 1966, Jean Kalnicki and her 6 kids were shocked to see a UFO hovering right outside their home in Dorchester, Massachusetts. In fact, it was so close, they thought it might hit them. It moved off, but just a few hours later, it was back, and this time it ran right into the side of their apartment building, causing the whole structure to vibrate and the power to go out. And this was just one of many sightings in this area at that time. 2. A UFO with a message. The night of December 12, 1967, would change the life of Rita Malley forever. As she drove with her young son near Ithaca, New York, a UFO began to follow her down the highway. Suddenly it struck her car with a beam of light, pulling it off the road. Subsequently, a multitude of voices addressed her, conveying a chilling message. The very next day, Rita learned that the message from the UFO was absolutely accurate. This case was just one of hundreds in the same area around the same time. 3. Struck by a beam of light from a UFO. Around dusk on June 17, 1977, Dale Schexnayder and 2 children, Jenna, age 14, and Chrissy, age 11, were walking to their car at Codal Lake in Louisiana when a UFO appeared. Suddenly it came right over their heads, sending down multiple beams of light that struck them on the solar plexus. They were unable to move and saw with shock that their entire bodies were glowing with electric blue light. Hours later, a tragic event occurred that seemed connected to their sighting in some indefinable way. 4. Alien footprints? On the night of September 4, 1979, Jerzy Wasilewski left his 4th-floor apartment in Wrocław, Poland, to take a short walk. He left his kitchen window open. Returning later, he was shocked to see 17 strange footprints leading from the open window, meandering around his kitchen and hallway, and going back to the open window. The prints looked like burn marks from some strange creature. But a later analysis revealed that these prints were something much more strange and inexplicable. 5. I was trying hard to hold on to reality. On the night of March 8, 1982, John and his wife were in their home in Bethel, Connecticut, when the whole house began to shake. Fearing an earthquake, they ran outside only to be confronted by a massive shadowy object with scores of tiny red lights lining its edges. John later learned that many other witnesses in the area saw the same object and reported odd effects. 6. High strangeness in Slauson. At 10:42 p.m. on December 27, 2013, Eva looked outside the window of her home in Slauson, Poland, and saw a huge glowing UFO at treetop level. She called to her mother, Anna, and both watched the object approach. Suddenly the sound from their loud radio disappeared, and time seemed to move in slow motion. As the craft passed over a street lamp, it pulled the light away from the street lamp, as if it had some kind of force field that could bend light. These 6 cases, all close encounters of the second kind, show that UFOs can affect the environment, and the witnesses, in weird and unusual ways that defy comprehension. Cases like these have much to teach us about these strange crafts visiting our planet and the behavior of the occupants inside them. The elf, the boogeyman, and the UFO. Was I abducted? I have quite a few rather weird memories from my childhood. I can't remember exactly the order in which they happened, and some of them are hazy and almost dreamlike, but I can say with near certainty that they really happened. The first of these events, if I am to conjure up a chronological order based on guesswork, took place while I was staying at an isolated English farmhouse with my then best friend. I woke up in the middle of the night and found that I couldn't breathe. I've never had an asthma attack before or since, and yet this must be what one would feel like. I couldn't breathe or speak. I tried to scream for help but couldn't, and so I instead elected to knock over a lamp when I saw my friend's mother walk past in the corridor outside my bedroom. Luckily, she noticed me and convinced my parents to take me to the nearby hospital. My mother took me out to the car while my father stayed in the house to look after my younger brother, who was a baby in a crib at the time. Once I was in the car with a blanket over me, my mother left me there temporarily so that she could go get changed out of her pajamas and into some clothes appropriate to take me to the hospital. As I sat there in the car, my attention was drawn to an enormous globe of red light on the horizon. It was huge, like the sun but entirely red. Imagine holding a basketball at arm's length away from your face, and then you'll get an idea of the size of the thing from my perspective. Its light was contained within the circular shape, so it wasn't like it was lighting up the entire sky. This thing moved across the sky from right to left in a smooth, wide arc movement. It went up and then down in about a minute, seeming to be very controlled and methodical. It wasn't a jerky or sudden movement like a meteor or anything. Eventually I rationalized the event away as having been a hypnagogic hallucination until I asked my dad if he had ever seen a UFO, to which he shockingly replied that he had indeed seen something weird in the sky. As he told his story, he revealed that he had seen a bright red light on the horizon that night while looking after my brother. Eventually they took me to the hospital, and I remember that the doctor seeing me said that there was nothing medically wrong with me. It was just a weird incident that apparently didn't have a real causation. That morning, I woke up and experienced some sort of weird hallucination. I remember opening my eyes and seeing these colorful floaters around my field of vision. Like what you get if you screw your eyes tightly shut, and I briefly caught sight of a spindly hand reaching up from underneath my friend's bed. It looked like a load of fleshy strings all tightly wound around each other to form the shape of a spindly hand with sharp fingers. It was brownish pink in color. I can't remember what happened after that, but I would guess that the hallucination disappeared and I began my day disturbed. Now here's where things get weirder. I can't remember if these dreams were already a thing in my life before I saw the red sun or if they started afterwards. Quite frequently as I was trying to sleep, I would get an obvious image in my head of a bulbous humanoid head looking up from the foot of my bed. I originally thought of it as one of Santa's elves, and I would normally see it around Christmas time. It would always give me an intense physical reaction of fear. I would shiver and tightly close my eyes in an attempt to suppress the thought. To describe the thing, it was a wide-faced entity with enormous eyes with crystal blue irises. It had a wrinkled forehead and a grotesque grin with white, square teeth. It smelled like balloon rubber. I can't recall the ears or nose, but I remember the oval face, eyes, and smile. I remember seeing the eyes slowly blinking like a puppet or animatronic. The whole creature looked very fake. I can't remember where such a vivid image came from, but I remember it being viscerally disturbing to me. A possible later theory was that my brain lifted the image from an illustration of a gremlin I'd seen in an encyclopedia of folklore. It had a similar kind of smile and face shape, but I have no idea where I got the blue eyes, the blinking, and even the smell of the creature from. Unfortunately, I can't find the illustration anywhere nowadays. I got the book from a library in Swansea, Wales. The third and final memory, which may be related to my abduction, is the most challenging to pinpoint. I was staying in a tent with the same friend I had been staying with when I saw the red sun, and we were telling scary stories about a monster that he insisted existed called the Boomer. This kid was actually quite influential on me, and I remember attributing a few other weird experiences to this likely fictional critter. But back to the story, so he and I were telling stories, well, more like he was just terrifying me while I listened in silence, before we eventually decided to get some sleep. I remember waking up and seeing the tent lit up as if someone was shining a torch through it or as if there were car headlights directly outside. My friend and I woke up to the same sight and debated whether to leave the tent to see what was causing the noise. Being plucky 10-year-olds, we eventually decided to go outside and face down the Boomer. However, it was anticlimactic because it was just his dad driving the tractor. We didn't realize at the time that he didn't own a tractor, but it made sense to us at the time. We went back to bed and eventually forgot about the entire weird event, until recently, when I was trying to remember more about the Boomer and the weird experiences I'd attributed to it. So what do you think? I've tried to assemble my 3 abduction-related memories into a loosely chronological narrative. This is exactly how I recall these events. I am certain that the incident involving the Red Sun UFO was real and that the image of the elf figure haunted me, but the incident involving the tractor seems to be the least credible. I guess that it is possible that it was a dream, then again, why would I remember it so much later? Or maybe just caused by his dad getting a tractor from a nearby farmhouse. But the Red Sun UFO and the elf are definitely things that I can't entirely explain. 6 humanoid encounters. When people report an encounter with extraterrestrials, the humanoid form seems to be the universal template. The majority of reports involve some kind of bipedal figure. There are countless cases worldwide. These accounts come from all over the world and have been occurring for decade after decade. The cases have fascinating commonalities that point towards the veracity of these cases, and they are also supported by a wide array of powerful evidence. This compilation presents 6 cases of face-to-face encounters with humanoids. There are far too many cases to discount, deny, or debunk. The evidence speaks for itself. We are not alone. There is life beyond Earth. 1. The Little Man of Norrbotten. From 1970 to 1972, numerous people over a wide area around Norrbotten, Sweden, encountered a strange little man that did not appear to be human. Witnesses described the figure as being about 4 feet tall and wearing a kind of helmet and raincoat. He was most often seen along remote highways late at night. The encounters were usually accompanied by brilliant lights and mysterious sounds. Some witnesses experienced strange physiological effects as a result of their encounters. 2. Aliens at a radio station. In the spring of 1975, a night watchman employed at the Maribor radio station in Yugoslavia, now Slovenia, received a series of strange phone calls at the station. 2 months later, he was on the night shift at the station when the TV he was watching strangely malfunctioned. Without warning, 4 tall humanoid figures walked into the room. One approached the witness, who found himself paralyzed, and pressed his thumb against the back of his neck. The high strangeness had just begun. 3. A purple-haired alien. On the morning of March 13, 1978, student Claudio Franco, age 10, was at school in Vilar Formosa, Portugal. During class, he went alone to the bathroom, and as he exited, a strange force pushed him to the ground. Looking up, he was confronted by an incredible sight: a humanoid figure with purple hair and a wrinkled/scarred face, wearing a skin-tight white jumpsuit, was staring down at him. After 10 long minutes, the figure pressed some buttons on a device strapped to his waist and disappeared in a blaze of colored lights. Afterward, Claudio's back hurt, and he found burn marks where the entity had apparently pushed him down. 4. My world would never again be the same. One night in August of 1979, Mrs. H.M. Dickinson and a friend were on the patio in her home overlooking Patten Bay in Surrey, Maine, when she and a friend saw a little bulb-shaped, transparent craft floating just a few feet away. Inside they saw a strange creature with an oddly shaped bald head and dark eyes. The creature swiveled its head and glared at her as it moved off into the distance. A few days later, the strange craft was returned. And again, Mrs. H.M. was not the only witness. 5. I never believed in aliens. Night was just beginning to fall one evening in February 1981 when an anonymous farmer from Westfield, North Carolina, went to search for his dog, who had run off. After a short walk up a hill near his farm, the farmer discovered his dog biting and attacking a small, thin, hairless humanoid with large dark eyes. The humanoid's legs were badly mangled by his dog. The farmer ran off in terror. When he returned the next morning, the strange humanoid was gone, and his dog was dead. Soon other people in the area reported UFO activity. 6. The aliens followed them home. On the afternoon of December 19, 2015, 2 brothers, Miguel and Patricia, were hiking in the forest near their home in Araucania, Chile, when 2 tall humanoids wearing white jumpsuits confronted them. The entities blazed with heat. The boys ran home, and to their shock, the humanoids chased them. Arriving home, they closed the windows and locked the doors. Their mother also saw the 2 humanoids, who remained outside for the next 2 hours. These 6 cases contain many profound insights into the nature of UFO contact. They show how similar ETs can be. They show how frightening a close encounter can be. They show how incredibly advanced extraterrestrials are. Most importantly, these cases provide undeniable evidence for the reality of these strange visitors from beyond Earth. Something in my house at night? The layout. The first thing you need to know is that my bedroom has it set up so that I can see the doorway that leads to the living room, inside the kitchen, the entire kitchen, and the doorway to my dad's room from where I usually sleep. The second is that all the closets in the house are on tracks, so when they get barely pushed, it sounds like someone's riding an old-timey train down a railroad. In other words, it's very loud. The third most important thing is that when you walk into the kitchen, you can't see the floor of the other half, thanks to a huge island/counter thing in the middle of it. Perfect horror movie setting, right? Fourth, there's the usual creepy stuff in my house: loud noises at night, a murder, and records indicating that a body was buried somewhere in the yard during the 1800s. I also live next to the highway, so I'm always afraid of crazy drifters. Oh, yeah, and I've seen my fair share of UFOs over the house, cigar-shaped, if anyone was wondering. The first encounter. Now my stepbrother's room is next to mine, and he's gone to his father's most weekends I'm there, so his room is usually empty. Or at least I thought it was. One night as I got up to donate to the local water supply, I noticed a noise coming from his bedroom. I opened the door and saw that he had left his window open. Looking back, it was strange, as the then 6-year-old couldn't have unlocked the window, so either dad unlocked it for him or maybe something else opened it. But that night I wrote it off as needing to close and went on to finish what I had come to do. As I was peeing, I heard his closet door rattle, which scared the piss out of me, literally, as I had a very deep fear of getting caught in the bathroom with something outside the door or inside the shower. So there I sat, freaking out thinking that someone's in the house, too afraid to make any more noise or leave the bathroom, when I hear footsteps. Not quiet footsteps, but average-sized person footsteps. I gave it a few minutes before I felt safe to peek my head out and make sure the coast was clear. There was no one in the hallway and no one in the kitchen, so I tiptoed to the kitchen and grabbed a steak knife from the steak knife holder, then went from room to room checking for whoever made the footsteps and also making sure nothing valuable, to me, was gone. After realizing that whatever had made the sounds had either left or never existed at all, I went back to bed and fell asleep with the steak knife on my nightstand. In the morning after a shower and some breakfast, I went to check the yard, and to my dismay, I found nothing. I blew the event off as a late-night pee dream. Peekaboo. Now, I have a dog that I adopted that slept in the hallway and would go through the kitchen to get to her food and water in the living room. One night, about a week after the first encounter, I'm up watching some foreign movies looking for something scary when I hear the dog barking. Usually she doesn't bark unless she sees someone outside or someone's at the door, so I thought that maybe whoever had been in my stepbrother's room had come back to slit my throat and hear the lamentations of my women. Luckily, I had gotten smart and prepared, so I grabbed the BB gun that I had bought off a buddy. It looks real enough that I thought it would scare any would-be intruders, and slipped off towards the kitchen for a good old Mexican standoff with no teeth macabre veins. My county is the #1 heroin user in the state, so I figured that if it was a robber, he'd be stealing for drug money. When I got to the kitchen, I could barely see anything. The only light was coming from passing cars on the highway and from the light above the stove. Harley, my dog, is barking and growling, blocking me from actually getting into the kitchen. I told her to go lie down, but she ignored me, so I pushed her back behind me and told her in as loud as a whisper as I could to go lie down a couple of times before she finally got the message. I stood in my half of the kitchen, watching the other doorway for just a couple of minutes before I saw it. Something is sticking out from behind the island. It was too dark for me to actually get a good look at it, as I mostly saw the shape it made when it blocked out a little bit of the pool of light from the oven light, if that makes any sense. Either way, it was some sort of foot/hand/shoulders/knees/and/toes that belonged to someone hiding behind the island. I knew I had him trapped back there because he'd either have to get up and confront me or get up and try to run and face my, seemingly real, gun. What he did next has never left me. The thing, as I'll call it now, popped its head up over the island and smiled. It had inky black skin that looked like latex, all reflective and smooth. It had a wide mouth, a nearly spherical head, and eyes almost on either side. I screamed. Luckily, when I'm terrified, my scream comes out as sort of a hoarse squeal, and the thing just kind of slid itself back up against the refrigerator and began to slide along the wall. It looked like this thing from Insidious but with 2 white eyes instead of 1 red. But after it started sliding along the wall, it got next to the sink, so it began to bend backward, but not inhumanly backward, until it could open and lift the small window above the sink, which it then proceeded to ducking backflip through. What could it be? Does anyone have any idea what it could have been? It didn't seem intent on harming me, and I didn't find anything stolen. My butt hasn't been probed, sadly, and I haven't heard of any good gymnast big feet in my area. Whatever he was, I'm glad to have had the encounter. Admittedly, I was scared when I first saw him, but now that I've had time to move myself and my dad far from that house, I think it's a cool story to have. Aliens. Claimed abductees believe they have alien implants under their skin in various places. Roger Lair, medical doctor and lifelong surgeon, surgically examines and retrieves strange metallic items from under claimed abductees' skin. Laboratory analysis reveals an extremely odd chemical makeup of the metallic objects. Lair performed dozens of these surgeries. Crop circles. The book by Elto Hasselhoff, Ph.D., reveals many strange anomalies in certain crop circle formations. High EM radiation levels in the center of the formation. Stalks are not broken. The lowest stalk node is elongated like taffy until the stalk just falls over. Seeds from the affected portion of the formation will not be eaten by mice under scientific test conditions. Extremely complex geometric patterns that are only understood by very few mathematicians. Travis Walton alien abduction. 5 eyewitnesses to alien craft. All pass lie detector tests. Walton claims an intense beam of light came down from the craft onto the ground. Scientific study of the exact area where the beam came down reveals strange tree growth in new trees. Tree ring data shows trees growth stunted in the direction of where the beam came down. The phenomenon of alien abduction is well known. John Mack, Ph.D., Dean of the School of Psychiatry at Harvard, discovers through regressive hypnosis of dozens of patients from all over the country the now classic alien abduction scenario. No identifiable psychosis in patients. Almost identical details in reports. Mack understands the importance of this possibility. Alien abduction cases become the focus of professional study for the rest of his life. David Jacobs, Ph.D., also makes alien abduction cases his life's focus. He has personally guided thousands of people from all over the world in their journey. They were all narrating nearly identical stories. His method of regression was very scientific, with no leading questions. Did not regress individuals with known psychosis. The author asserts that hypnotic regression is the least reliable form of evidence, yet the remarkably consistent details from case to case and the substantial volume of cases dispel any doubt. Regressive hypnosis has been approved by the AMA as scientifically viable since the 1950s. Dayton, Ohio between the years 1997 and 2007. And 2020. I was 8 when we moved into this old country house on 89 acres of land, and I lived there for 10 years. Previously, we lived in a ranch-style home in a neighborhood. I've returned several times, never alone, because it's my home. However, I also never return alone because it feels unsafe to do so. Allow me to explain. When we first moved in, my brother and sister would notice red eyes peering through windows. Not low either, high. Always looking down. Weekly, almost nightly, those eyes. We developed a fear of windows. Nevertheless, we tried to make the best of living there. I mean, something was just looking into the house. And to be honest, we hadn't experienced anything else. So we ventured into the woods. We played in the creeks. We never went out at night. Time moved on. Mom and Dad divorced, and we left briefly. Only to return back with my dad and his new wife. I am the only child living in the house. My siblings lived with my mom, and my step-siblings lived with their dad. It wouldn't be long, and I'd hear weird things in the house. Footsteps walking across upstairs. Coming down the stairs. When I opened the door, there was no one there. My dad, a ducking twit, didn't care for curtains. So I eventually hung blankets over all my bedroom windows. I always, and I mean always, felt like I was being watched. I was fortunate to have a deadbolt on my bedroom door, which I utilized every night. Now I never put much thought into it, but all the doors did. And the front door had 6 ducking locks on it. I never thought them any good because the door was mostly glass window. Those locks aren't stopping shit. I'm getting to the juicy bits. Hang tight. So one Saturday night it's just me and my brother and stepbrother. They're watching a recap of WWE, and I'm playing Free Cell on the computer in the dining room next to an open window. I know, open window? You just said windows is bad. It was summer, I was 15, we lacked AC, and I felt comfortable and safe with my brothers. Moving on. Whistling. I hear whistling outside. It's midnight. Who the hell is outside whistling? I thought, it's Dad. No, Dad would have to walk past me to go out. And he'd be irritated that we were still up. So who's whistling? It's getting closer, walking the sidewalk around the house. I call my brothers over. They do the same thing, it's Dad. Which I quickly debunk. We're all about to shit ourselves. I rush us to my room before we see the whip or whatever it is as it nears our house. I lock my door. We stand there quietly. The front door opens, and the whistling stops. Now footsteps. I'm begging you, please go to the stairs. Whoever this is, I can pin them between Dad and myself. Dad's upstairs in bed, by the way. No, the footsteps start coming to my room. My brother and I look at each other in fear. I kid you not, their eyes welled up. My stepbrother started to cry quietly. The footsteps stop in front of our door, silence. I try to peek through the keyhole. I can't see a damn thing. I can see into the hall, but whatever is on the other side is out of view. So I get on my belly to look under the door. Shoes. I don't remember shoes when we came in, but I also don't remember paying attention to that detail. Damn it. So I whisper to my brothers, where are your shoes? One points across my room, the other to his feet. I wore boots exclusively, so they weren't mine. So there was an intruder, and they are right outside my door. I'm not going out without a fight, So I conjure a quick plan that involves my swords. Yes, swords. And me going out the door first in a charge. On the count of 3, my brother swings the door open. I charge. And nothing. Nothing is there. There were no footprints that indicated they left. The front door never opened, indicating they left. So what gives? I checked other rooms only to be confronted by my dad and his boxers cussing me out for being up. We tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. A year had passed. My brother, my 2 cousins, and I venture into the property next to mine. Seeking adventure. Well, we got lost. Well, from what I could tell from climbing trees, just really far from home. But I knew a road was nearby. So before the sun set, we needed to make it to that road. But while I was up a tree, I noticed these beautiful evergreens. I have never seen anything like it on my property. I was captivated. So I proposed a vote to the others: we keep heading X way towards the road. Or we head towards these sweet evergreens. My brother preferred taking the road. He was overweight and done with walking any more than he had to. My cousin and I said evergreens and told the other cousin he doesn't get to vote. So evergreens, here we go. Upon reaching the location, we noticed a massive elevation in the middle of these woods. We climbed to the top and were amazed by what we saw. Hickory trees. Massive ones. There was this dead one that we could walk in. It was like a little house. My cousins and I decided to knock it over. We knocked it over successfully. But while we were there, my brother began to freak out. We need to go, we need to leave, he insisted with purpose. I was like, okay, I know it's getting closer to sunset. But we're going to finish this task. He was not having it. He was increasingly insistent. So we left the area to calm the baby, as I put it. We entered a field. I looked at both ends and said, one of you go check that tree line, and the other go check the opposite tree line. Tell me what you see. My brother flips, no. Okay, I'll go check, and Tom will go check the other end. Once again, my brother says no. Argues this weird point about not splitting up. So we as a group went one direction, and hey, I recognized this place. Which meant home was in sight. Still far off, but we were back on our land. Once the house was visible, my brother took off running. He doesn't run. He's heavy, he loathed walking, let alone running. But he ran all the way home. I found it strange that he ran all the way home. My cousins left. My brother didn't speak a word. My mom showed up and took him home. My dad and I were confused. He never said he was leaving early. However, he was no longer present. Went home. Figured I walked him to death or something. 30 minutes go by, and he calls. Joey, now I can tell you. I saw something. I don't know what it was. It was tall, taller than Tom. It moved faster than you. They were watching us. You guys were knocking over that tree, and it kept running circles around us. I don't know if it noticed me watching it, it was watching us. I asked, and you didn't say anything because? He stammered, you guys would have wanted to run or fight it. There is no way we could have fought that thing or outrun it. I figured that since it didn't approach us, we still had a chance to slowly get away. Joey, that thing was a monster. It was hairy, it was big, it had so many teeth, and it looked crazy. I'm never going back into the fields again. And he didn't, in fact, he quit visiting after that. He asserted that the monster was indeed real, and he was unwilling to risk his safety. A month goes by. I didn't bother telling my step-siblings about this monster. I didn't mean to scare them off. They'd quit coming over, like my brother. One night my stepsister gets me up. She had been sleeping on the couch and said she woke up because of scratching noises. I was annoyed that she had woken me up, but I couldn't fathom why she had done so. Joey, the devil is at the front door. I heard scratching. I sat up, and there it stood. These crazy eyes are looking at me. Teeth, so many teeth. It's big, really big, and hairy. I'm scared. I asked what I was supposed to do. She insisted I go outside and make sure it's gone. Duck that, I'm not dying. I have 2 people telling me there's this thing. Neither person talks to the other, so it's unlikely they collaborated. Everything is pointing toward this being real, and it's literally at my front door. I peek into the living room. I've never seen this thing, now I may get to. But alas, nothing was there. Actually, my dog was, and he was begging to be let in. He was usually content outside and rarely wanted to come in. But I wasn't about to open that door. I figured he'd keep us safe, in some capacity. He could either alert us or provide us with food. Eventually Tom and I decided to hunt this thing. I even tried using my younger cousin as bait. No luck. To even find the place where my brother claimed he foresaw it, we had to get lost again. I kid you not, weirdest thing. You wander aimlessly, and suddenly you arrive at your destination. With no real direction. But before leaving, having not seen a monster, I took a piece of yellow rope and tied 2 trees together. Nothing significant, I was simply bored and thought it would be cool to watch them grow together. Another month drifts by, and my uncle stops by to go do some tracking. It wasn't long, and he was back at the house screaming at me about being a sick duck. I was confused and asked what he was going on about. He said just down the main trail there's a dead dog. I really didn't see what the big deal was. I decided to see for myself. Sure enough, there's this dog. But it's headless and footless, even the tail is gone. And no blood. And everything is deathly quiet. It happened so much that I was more than used to it. But I wasn't used to the mutilated dog and no blood. The wounds appeared to be clean. I noticed a yellow rope next to the dog. This yellow rope caught my attention. I stared at it for a long time. I know this rope. OMG, it's from the house. My stomach sank. But wait, no, I took that rope and tied those trees together. Wait. Panic sets in. Only 4 people know about that place. I described it to my dad and uncle, who hunt on the property, and they've never seen it. So who got this rope? I tied 2 figure 8s. Who would go through the trouble and place it here in the fork of the main trail? With this mutilated dog? I noped home, all I could figure was someone was sending me a message. Well, a week later my goofy self decides I'm going to see if the dog is still there. Nope. The dog has vanished. The rope is gone. Then suddenly a flock of birds takes off out of the trees and bushes behind me. Except for one I noticed. Finally I'm going to catch a bird, I thought. So I crept and crept. No matter how close I got, it didn't move. Then I noticed. It was impaled on a tree branch. It was impaled through the eye of the tree branch. The spot was exactly where the dog had been. Nope, duck this. I never saw a monster. The most I ever saw was a ghostly white figure I called the KKK ghost. For the longest time I was the only one that saw it until one rainy night my brothers saw it with me. Validation. I last visited the area a few years ago, accompanied by my wife and our mutual friends. I wanted everyone to know and see where I grew up. While there, we briefly separated into groups, boys with boys and girls with girls. My wife eventually came to me, "Why do you keep calling for me?" Her friend, "Yeah, is everything okay?" I replied with a smile, "Yeah, I heard you all too. I want to call for you all, though." They looked to her friend's husband. "We heard you too." He was like, "Yeah, and I heard you. What did you want?" At this point I laughed, "We need to leave now. Like right now. And don't look back. We weren't calling or yelling. And I'm guessing you weren't either." The girls were not. I wanted to show where I grew up and how spooky it was. I didn't think it would have delivered like that. Leaving, my wife looked back. "That can't be right. Joey, there's this large white figure." "Yep, I've seen it since I was 10. A humanoid watches me whenever I am using my telescopes. So the most recent encounter happened just yesterday evening, although it began back in the fall of 2019. Whenever I am using my telescope, no matter if it's outside or from within the observatory, occasionally there will be a tall humanoid being watching me from a distance. I will go over the details, as I want to know what exactly that being could be. The first encounter with it was in fall 2019, as I was inside the observatory looking west. As I then looked down into the garden, there was what I then thought was a human standing underneath a hanging vine plant looking up to me. I told the figure to go away because I thought it was a person who had sneaked into my garden. However, it did not respond and just stood there, barely moving. I then turned around to do telescope stuff, and as I looked again a few minutes later, it was no longer standing there. Since then, that thing will occasionally watch me from different places. I've encountered it about 10 to 15 times already, but seeing that it never really came directly to me, I am not scared when I see it. I just kind of started greeting it and minding my business until it's gone again. It has some favorite hangout spots where it will appear most of the time. That's what I have noticed so far, but more on that later. The human-shaped thing itself is about 2.5 to 2.7 meters tall. I compared its size to the vine plant it stood beneath when I saw it the first time, which is not higher than 2.8 meters. It's very skinny, but not skinny as in is absolutely just bones. The skin is dark, almost a perfect dark gray, varying in brightness about its body. I shined at it with a flashlight the second time I saw it to scare it away. Before that I thought it was plain black. The head is about normal human size, but I was not near enough to see eyes or a mouth, although it appears to have 2 dark areas, maybe holes, whereas humans would normally have eyes. Again, seen from the flashlight. It has longer legs and arms than humans, but their length fits its proportions. They are skinny too, and it usually has them just hanging down when it watches me. I was never close enough to see if it had fingers, but from a distance, it appears to have them. It also seems to have hair, which, interestingly, is very long and seems to touch the floor. Since it just basically stands and watches me, I've grown to just acknowledge it and let it watch me. It has never done anything that scared me so far. When I see it, it moves very little, just occasional arm twitches. It never takes a step in any direction, however, and it also never looks away from me. When I don't look at it for a long period of time, it's usually just gone or it changed its place, and when I look away while taking out my phone or try to take a photo in an obvious way, it's usually just gone within the few seconds I look at my phone to activate the camera. The places are different from time to time, although it has some favorite spots from which it watches me. These are the wine plants I told you about, 2 trees in the fields just right outside my garden and next to a small hedge. From there, it looks up to the observatory window. When I'm outside, it likes to stand in the open field or next to some trees. Does anyone know what that being could be, or have you had a similar experience? I'd also like to know if you believe it has the potential to become aggressive, and if so, what steps I could take to prevent it from doing so. Thanks in advance for listening to this. I was stalked by something when I was 19 to 20 years old. In 2010 to 2011, I was 19 and 20 years old. For the most part, my year was pretty normal. I did the standard post-high school stuff. I was taking a break from school before I started college. Had I not had these encounters, this year wouldn't even have been worthy of writing about. This series of encounters, to me, is what defines this year, more like 13 to 14 months. What I am about to recount are the multiple encounters I had with what I believe to be a shadow person. The first night I ever saw this entity was in October of 2010. I had just turned 19, and I was hanging out with 2 of my friends, joking around and watching the meteor shower going on that night. The meteor shower was at the tail end of its run, as it had peaked a day or 2 before. We were all chilling in my friend's driveway, sitting in the bed of his granddad's truck. It was getting late, and we were waiting for another friend of ours to come out and hang. After a while, we lost hope of him coming outside. It was around 2 a.m., so it made sense. Then around 2:30 a.m. we saw a shadow coming from his porch, and we thought, damn. Finally this guy is coming out, way we late. Then the shadow retracted back, and we all didn't see anything again for around 15 minutes. At around 2:45 a.m., we were all telling jokes and stories when my friend said, "Dude, what is that?" At that moment, my other friend and I turned to look at our friend's house. On the opposite side of the house, we noticed a very large shadow, which we initially thought was our friend. The shadow was most notable for standing up, holding my friend's rain gutter, and bending over. Even bent over, its head was even with the rain gutter of my friend's house. This shadow also seemed to have a solid, very lanky body, with broad shoulders, long fingers and legs, and a bulbous head. Its body seemed to fade the further it got from the center. It almost seemed as if it was smoking. It had plumes of black smoke emitting from its hole. At this point my friends had run off, one after the other. The first ran off immediately, and the other ran after about 20 seconds of being frozen and repeating the question, "What the F is that?" I was the last to start running, although only about a second or 2 after my second friend. By the time I started running, the entity had made its way into the middle of the road. At this point it was standing straight up and was enormous. I would say it was no shorter than 11 to 12 feet tall. It took about 4 strides to reach the middle of the road from the side of my friend's house, a distance I couldn't even cover in 15 to 20 of my own strides. I am 6. As I was running to my house, about 500 meters or so away, this thing was casually walking towards me. I was running at full speed, and this thing kept pace with me, maintaining a constant distance of about 15 feet. When I reached my house, in a panic, it took what seemed like forever for my key to work and open the door. When I made it inside, the entity was standing about 10 feet from my door, next to the tree in my yard. I immediately told my mom about it, but she didn't believe me, and when I went to see if it was still there, I saw it start to dissipate into the wind, as if the smoke was clearing. I was under the impression that my ordeal with this thing was over. No later than about 3 hours later, in the early morning light, I was woken up by dogs barking at something in my backyard. When I went to look, there it was again. For about 15 seconds I stared at it, frozen, and then it disappeared once again. That was the last time I saw it for around 8 months. The second incident, as I stated earlier, occurred around 8 months after the first. I was walking home from a friend's house at around 8 p.m. One of the roads I have to walk on is lined with a ton of fir trees, each about 3 to 4 feet apart, in a straight line for about a quarter mile. As I was walking down this road, about 200 meters from the end of the line of trees, the entity stepped out into the middle of the road in 2 strides, about 50 feet away from me. At this point I thought I was done for. I was so scared I couldn't move. It didn't move either, just stared at me. About a minute later it once again dissipated into the wind. This is the last time I would see this entity in its full corporeal form. The next time I would encounter it, or something similar, would be several months later. The third and final encounter took place in my room. The thing that makes this encounter stand out is that it was later accompanied by 2 other entities. It was around dinner time, and my mother was calling me down to come eat. I grabbed my phone and headed down. As I was about halfway through my doorway, I noticed a shadow starting to emit from my wall above my door. I instantly felt the same dread I did when I last saw the full entity. It then formed a ball, about softball sized, with the same characteristics as the full entity. A solid center that seemed to fade out and was surrounded by plumes of black smoke. It floated down and stopped right in front of me, a little to my left. I immediately thought that it was over, it had decided it was time to finally take me, or whatever. Then all of a sudden, after maybe 10 seconds of this thing floating there, 2 more orbs flew in from my right. Both these orbs were silvery white, metallic looking, with the same characteristic smoke, except it was white. These white orbs stopped in front of me too, one on top of the black orb and one below it, then suddenly flashed brightly. It was so bright that I was blinded for a second or two, and the orbs vanished. I then yelled out, "Oh, duck." Much to my mother's dismay, she yelled back with, "Hey, Mr. Langua." I heard my mother and stepfather both say, "Holy shit." And then I saw a second bright flash coming from downstairs. I immediately ran down and asked if they saw the orbs. They said yes, they saw 3 white orbs, in a stacked formation, go through the glass of our backyard door. They said it looked as if the orbs had melted through the glass and the glass solidified after it went through. It was then that I told my mom what I saw and that I had seen a black orb that was surrounded by the 2 white ones. After that event, my mother finally believed me about the full entity. The weirdest part about this last encounter is that all the dread I felt when I saw the black orb instantly went away and turned into almost a peaceful feeling the moment I saw the second flash, and my mother told me that she felt almost at peace too when she saw it. My question to you guys is, have any of you ever encountered anything similar? Have any of you encountered a black orb that was, seemingly, taken over by white orbs? Do any of you have stories like this or similar? Have any of you been stalked by shadow people? Please let me know what you guys think, and feel free to share your encounters. Faceless man in a suit. Back when I was maybe 16, I was home alone on a rainy day. On this day, I felt particularly terrible despite the rain, which I love, and couldn't bring myself to sit still. Consequently, I found myself pacing the house, frequently visiting the refrigerator, and engaging in the usual activities one might do when feeling bored at home. On my way back from my 50th trip to the kitchen, I heard my cat growling. I looked over to his cat tree that sits in front of the window and saw him with his back arched, fur standing up, and tail puffy. With a full-blown rage on his face, I figured there might be another animal in our driveway, on the sidewalk, or somewhere else. I walked over to see what he's growling at and noticed a man standing just before the end of the driveway. He was wearing a black suit that looked totally dry, dress shoes as clean as can be, and he had no face. He wasn't physically unusual other than that and the weird dark gray film that was faintly around him. Despite him not having a face, I knew without a doubt that he was staring at me. I could feel it. This horrible fear crept up my spine, I was frozen, and we just stared at each other for a while. Suddenly a shiny 1940 black Cadillac, I know nothing about cars, but I somehow knew what it was, a car that no one in my neighborhood has, drove by going toward the main street. As it passed, I watched the man fade into it, like he was suddenly on the other side of the street, and he was gone. My cat, who was enraged the entire time this was happening, began to settle down but was obviously confused about where the man went. He darted around the house, still somewhat agitated, looking out the windows trying to find him. I didn't know what to do or think. I had no influence to have my mind make it up, as this was before I had heard of Slender Man and before I heard of the Men in Black, not the movie, and I was so afraid that he'd come back later to get me. It wasn't until years later that a friend I told explained the Men in Black to me and that he doesn't know why that man appeared to me or how I'm still alive. Not a very fun thing to hear, especially with how paranoid I used to be thanks to other weird occurrences in my life. I never saw the man or anything like him ever again after that day, and I'm honestly so grateful for that. I still don't know how to feel about it. Truly incredible humanoid encounters. 1. The UFO next door. On the night of May 5, 1952, Ann L. Zone, a nurse, looked out the window of her home in Prospect Park, Illinois, and saw a massive, saucer-shaped craft with a line of portholes around the circumference. It hovered less than 100 feet away. Through the portholes, Ann was awestruck to see 3 humanoids. One was in profile and appeared to be busy at a control board. But 2 were looking down right at her. After a few moments, the craft glowed with light and darted away at high speed. Ann's husband arrived home the next morning from his night shift at the newspaper office, and after hearing her story, he said that 2 other people had contacted their office to share their sighting of a craft on the same night, just a short distance away in Round Lake. Investigating where the craft had hovered, they found that all the plants below were withered and dead, including a line of evergreen trees and Ann's prized rose bushes. Also, the paint on the side of the house closest to the craft was blistered and peeling. 2. A feeling of being watched. On the night of December 9, 1960, Madame Delins heard her dog barking and glanced out the window of her home in Carignan, France, to see what was wrong. She took a double take when she noticed an oval-shaped craft the size of 2 cars landed in the yard a short distance away. Inside, through portholes on the side of the craft, she noticed movement. Someone was inside the craft, and she had the feeling they were watching her. Moments later, the object rose up and darted away. Little did she know that a few of her neighbors had also noticed the craft. Going to the site the next day, Madame Delins was amazed to find a precise circle of yellowed grass. She called the newspaper, and soon the sighting was thoroughly investigated by French researchers who became convinced that the witnesses had seen something very unusual. 3. The most unforgettable experience of my life. On the night of March 20, 1967, Jim Rubel and his daughter Jean decided to take a drive to investigate weird lights in the sky that Jim's wife had seen near their home in Butler, Pennsylvania. After driving a short while and seeing nothing, they decided to pull over and wait. Moments later, their patience was rewarded when 2 strange lights appeared overhead. Almost immediately, the lights moved towards them, appeared to land on the ground, and raced to their car on an apparent collision course. Jim was paralyzed with fear, standing next to the car. Jean sat in the passenger seat, bracing for impact. She suddenly heard weird voices speaking to her telepathically, saying "Don't move" over and over. Without warning, just as the lights seemed about to crash into them, the lights disappeared, and standing directly in front of their vehicle were 5 strange humanoids. They looked human but had slits for eyes, blank expressions, and scarred-looking skin. The Dibbles fled in terror, and fearing that they had a demonic encounter, they went straight to their local minister for counseling. Jim later returned to the location but found no evidence. The town of Butler does have a few other intriguing encounters, including one with another very strange humanoid. 4. The man on the flying box. At 5:30 p.m. one night in November 1974, Giovanna Sensili was at her farm in Castelmordino, Italy, when her pigs and chickens began acting up and staring into the sky. Looking up, Giovanna saw a man in a tight-fitting, colorful, full-body jumpsuit straddling a floating box-shaped craft and staring down at her. A short distance away, a brilliant object hung in the sky, close enough that Giovanna could feel heat emanating from it. The man maneuvered around the farm for a few moments, almost landing on a nearby haystack, and then took off in the direction of a nearby cemetery. It looked to Giovanna that he landed there. She did not go to investigate and, in fact, kept her encounter secret, telling only a few people. But word spread fast, and a family friend turned out to be a well-known researcher who began an investigation. 5. A robotic being. It was 1:30 a.m. early one morning in mid-September 1977, as Luis Almeida watered the garden behind his home in Gondomar, Portugal. Without warning, a bright light shone on him from behind the brick wall bordering his property. Looking up, he was shocked to see that it was coming from a 6-foot-tall, 3-foot-wide, gray, metallic, robot-looking figure with a squarish head and a light in the middle of it. Terrified, he ran inside to the safety of his wife and mother. They were shocked to see him pale and shaking. They asked him what was wrong, but Luis was so traumatized that he couldn't talk about it. 6. The day the ETS came to visit. On the night of November 2, 1977, 16-year-old Elsie sat alone watching television in the home of his aunt, located in Joaquim Murtinho, Brazil. Suddenly, even though the doors were closed and locked, a glowing, metallic Saturn-shaped object, 2 feet wide, entered his home. Moments later, a tall, human-looking figure dressed in a jumpsuit appeared and disappeared in his living room. Elsie followed the Saturn-shaped object outside, where he was met by the man and 2 other figures. 2 of the figures grabbed his arms and pulled him up to the doorway of a large craft that had landed in his backyard. LC saw other figures inside operating complicated equipment. The beings next to him began to communicate telepathically. They used a weird device to examine his hands. After a few moments, they lined up and told him they would see him again. They also predicted that tragedy would strike his family. As the craft took off, LC attempted to seek assistance, but the trauma of the event rendered him speechless. Later, the tragic events occurred just as the ETs predicted. 7. The Alien and the Fisherman. On the night of February 4, 1978, 6 men, all fishing buddies, went fishing on Lake La Florida in San Luis, Argentina. After a few hours, they were stunned when a brilliant light lit up the area like daylight. Looking at the source of the light, all 6 men observed a saucer-shaped object rise from behind a nearby hill. A door opened, and a small, flexible ladder extended down to the ground. A tall figure came down the ladder and approached the stunned group. They saw that he had fair skin, blonde hair, and was dressed in a silvery jumpsuit. The man smiled at them and held his arms and hands out in a welcoming gesture. The men were too stunned to react. The man quickly turned around and re-entered the craft, which rose up and darted off so swiftly, it left a luminous trail behind. The men reported their encounter, causing a media frenzy. Later, police and the military investigated the case. They photographed and documented the strange footprints left where the being had stood. Investigators also learned that residents in the area had seen the craft as it moved off. 8. The Singing Extraterrestrials. As investigated by researcher Anton Anfalov, in February 1982, 2 men were exploring the monuments in the area of Borak, Russia, and taking photographs. Suddenly they came upon a large craft shaped like a loaf of bread. It opened like a blooming flower, and 2 tall humanoids emerged. They wore glowing jumpsuits and had pale skin, close-set eyes, and fine features. One of the men became frozen in place and fell into a daze. The other stood there as the 2 figures approached him and began to communicate in sing-song melodic harmonies. The witness himself was shocked when he answered them in the same tones, seemingly against his will. The witness recalls only fragments of the brief conversation that followed. He managed to snap a couple of photographs before the beings returned to the craft, which departed suddenly. The other man woke up with no memory of any conversation but did remember the beings. Unfortunately, the photos came out completely blank. The main witness reports that his outlook on life became deeply philosophical. 9. It was strange. One night in August of 1983, 4 12-year-old boys were playing in a forested area adjacent to their homes in Opole, Poland. Suddenly a heavy fog appeared around them, followed by a loud buzzing noise and a brilliant light coming from above. Moments later, a 150-foot wide, bowl-shaped craft landed right in front of them. The boys observed 2 short, slender humanoids appear in front of the craft and glide across the terrain at high speed. The boys chased the figures, who disappeared into the forest and were gone. Moments later, the craft rose up, darting vertically so quickly, it punched a clean hole in the fog. The next day, the boys returned to the location and found 3 deep holes impressed into the earth where the craft had sat. Later, as an adult, one of the witnesses experienced 2 visitations in his bedroom by a strange entity. 10. Humans don't know what they have. On March 26, 2002, an anonymous salesman drove in his car along a remote road outside the small town of Cazalla de la Sierra, Spain. Coming around a corner, he stopped when he saw a pear-shaped craft sitting in the center of the road. Looking into the field, he saw 2 7-foot-tall humanoids in jumpsuits. He got out of his vehicle and walked up to them. One returned to the craft, walking in a heavy, clumsy way. The other remained and greeted the witness, who offered to help. The figure said they were from another planet, that Earth was prettier, and that they were fine. Of the face. I checked Google Images many times but haven't come across the image that my nephew remembered seeing in the volume. Does anyone else know about the wrinkled face aliens? I, 27 male, am being monitored by Greys. The first time I ever communicated was when I had taken some psilocybin mushrooms, definitely not my first trip, that year. I like to take small amounts and sit alone, mostly practicing introspection and thinking about political issues. On this occasion, I sat in the dark, reflecting and listening to soft music. I know it sounds strange. Anyway, I was just enjoying the headspace when I heard a voice in my head. This had never happened to me before, so it definitely caught my attention and threw a wrench in my trip. The voice said, "We are an ancient, sentient species and have much to tell." I tried to stand up, but my whole body had gone weirdly limp. I continued to listen, but I didn't hear anything else, or at least not anything I can recall from 7 to 8 years ago. I spent the next few months trying to wrap my mind around what I had heard, until finally I just wrote it off as a weird mushroom experience. Fast forward 8-ish months. I have a dream that blows my mind. It starts out with what looks like the eye of Sauron, except it is blue, and instead of an eye, there is a blacked out humanoid form. I hear the voice call me by name and tell me that he is my creator. What happened next in the dream was so much to retain that I lost some of it upon waking up, but I rushed to my laptop the second I woke up to type as much of it as I could. He told me that humanity is an ongoing experiment that they have been conducting for a very long time. He mentioned the concept of time flowing in a circle, but this concept was so abstract to me at the time that it was unfortunately lost. The voice continued, explaining that humans sometimes deviate so much from the norm that they must confront their mistakes and begin anew. Next thing I know, I'm seeing the Space Needle in Seattle, Washington, USA. I live in Kansas, USA. The voice informs me that what I'm about to witness is the next step towards cleansing the slate, if necessary. A blue fog begins spilling from the tip of the Space Needle. It feels as if I'm floating in the sky near the top of the building. I then see other monuments around the world doing the same thing, for example, the Washington Monument, the Eiffel Tower, and a few others that I can't remember, all from the same view, as if I'm floating in the air near the top of the monuments. I then hear the voice saying, "All right, so-and-so, it's time to wake up," but the way it's said in my head is just so damn soothing, the most calming thing I've ever heard. It was beautiful. I also woke up with a lingering thought that I had something to accomplish down here. Upon waking up, I found myself covered in sweat and quickly rushed to my laptop to begin typing my thoughts. Following that, I called my father and eagerly shared everything with him. Let me give you a little background on my family. My sister once had a dream about a SeaWorld trainer dying in an orca attack. She woke up and told our dad, BTW, this happened before my dream, I believe, but before she could say anything, the news came back on, and she saw that her dream had actually happened and began crying before she could get any of it out. A little more background on me. As a child, I had a deep love for space and it always felt like my heart wasn't actually on Earth but somewhere up there. I often joke that I was dropped off on the wrong planet, and it's honestly a little more than a joke for me anymore. I also had a fascination with Antarctica and megalithic structures. I was raised in a Christian household and was introduced to the concept of a creator early on. I still retain a lot of the spiritual aspect in my relationship with my higher power, but I'm not a church person, at all. I could go into a whole thing here, but I won't. To me, all of this alien stuff ties in perfectly with ancient texts that religions were founded on. Also, the relationships between different religions are very interesting if you ever want to pick something new up to read. Sorry, guys, my dad majored in theology. Now that I've lost another handful of readers, I'll get back to it. My next encounter didn't happen until 2016, so this took me completely off guard. I'm out watching the stars at around 3 a.m. I was at my grandma's, just outside the city, so visibility was okay. My dad trained me as a child to look for constellations and recognize satellites, as well as watch as the ISS would pass over us. I'm out on the front porch and see a satellite go across the sky, but then it starts getting bigger. I'm confused because the sight isn't something I've ever seen before. Eventually it stops going across the sky, and it looks like it's coming in my direction. It goes from being that bluish white to orange. By this time I'm almost shitting myself, guys, because in the back of my mind I know what it is, but I'm in denial. It gets to about the size of a cigarette cherry in the sky, and it looks like fire spinning as a UFO would and does. It just sits there, stationary, and I hear another voice asking me if I want to get on. I tell them, no thanks, I'm not done being here on Earth, I think. To which they just kind of okay then and fly back up. Afterwards, a car comes rolling into the cul-de-sac. I forgot to mention that there is an Air Force base a few miles away from my grandma's house. It's about 4:15 a.m. and the car starts throwing newspapers out of the window. I begin to calm myself until I notice that it's two guys in suits and wearing sunglasses. Yo, it's dark though, staring at me as they leave. A voice tells me that I should pick up the newspapers, so my scared ass grabs them off the neighbor's drives, sorry, and I bolt inside. I look at the front page of the paper, and one of them had a picture of Trump sitting at a desk, but there was a cute little misprint because the glass of water Trump had in front of him had a little him standing inside of it. Random AF, and my grandma threw away the paper while I was asleep, but just another part of the story. Sorry I don't have the picture still, I wish I did. I've been typing this on my phone for 3 hours now, so I apologize if I'm losing professionalism and things are starting to run on and not be as coherent. So the very next night I'm asleep in the basement because, going back out there right now, am I right? So I'm putting down some good Z's when I hear that oh so calming voice again. So, it's time to wake up. I open my eyes, and boom. There he is in my grandma's basement. Maybe 7 feet away, this giant, bioluminescent, silvery being is kneeling down and playing with the damn TV wires. He had big black eyes, no mouth, and no slits, and I would estimate him to have been around 8 feet tall because I don't think he would have fit in the basement standing up. He was ducking huge, man. My mind started panicking, and I passed out from fear. I woke up in disbelief, thinking about how much harder life would be. Sure enough, I find myself doing 2 years in prison for a car accident with none other than the prosecutor's parents. The night before my sentencing, I had another dream. It was animated and really cool. The animation depicted the earth whirling while a comically oversized gray figure donned one of my jackets with the hood up. He was walking on top of the earth and told me something about a misunderstood relationship with humanity. Honestly, the most I remember from this dream was the images. The shock from my sentencing kind of threw things off. I was told by my expensive-ass lawyer that I had a 95% chance of getting probation. I also saw a black and white image of what I can only guess was the interior of a spacecraft. During my time of incarceration, I decided to stick my nose in the Bible and seek knowledge, knowing that there are several passages alluding to the existence of extraterrestrial life. Almost every night, I experienced vivid dreams that I continue to record to this day. I had a handful of minor dreams about aliens. The most notable one happened on a night when I was speaking to my higher power before bed, asking him if I could ever understand him better. And he did. The dream began with a bright light slowly dimming until I could see what looked like a stone temple floor below me. My mind made it clear that I was sitting cross-legged. I began to look up, and I saw a much older gray than the one I saw in my grandma's basement. I really hate how stupid that sounds. Hey, where'd you see the alien? Oh, my GMA's basement, bro. He was wearing an orange robe comparable to one that a monk would wear. I apologize for my ignorance on this subject. This one was different somehow because he didn't look typical. I don't know how else to describe him. He almost looked to be smiling somehow, but I can't remember if I even saw a mouth on him. He put a finger to each of his temples, and the next thing I know, I see this giant-headed little green alien that is really harshing the mellow the other one gave me. I woke up shortly after. Another notable dream was just a black and white photo of one of the Egyptian pyramids. Okay, last 2 UFO sighting stories, and I'm done. These ones are minor in comparison to the other one but still cool. The first incident occurred during my imprisonment in the winter. I was working out with a friend in the evening. It's dark. He watches Ancient Aliens and listens to me when I speak, so I would just casually go over this stuff with him. I'm rattling on about this subject with one of his hesitant to believe friends, and I hear my buddy say, "What the duck?" The other guy and I look up, and there are 3 little lights in a triangular formation, and they're all switching spots before slowly just disappearing. The last one happened just a few weeks ago when my girlfriend and I were at one of my friend's houses sitting in the backyard. As I am prone to, I'm speaking about aliens with him, telling him about my contact for the first time even though I've known him for years. He is kind of just listening emptily until we all 3 see a light flash in the sky. A few seconds later it lights up in the same spot. There is a part of the house next to it that I used as a place marker. It then flashes a third and final time. Well, the end of the story probably sounds run-on, but that's because I've been thinking and typing for, 5-ish hours, and my brain is done, so I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this. My 2 childhood encounters. First experience. UFO humanoid. This is probably going to be long, and I apologize in advance. This is the first time I have publicly told this story. This is also my first time sharing here, so bear with me. These experiences began on my family's farm in South Texas in the late 80s/early 90s. I was around 8 to 10 years old when this began. My initial memory of the exact time frame is a bit skewed due to my age at the time, but the majority of the details of the experience itself are clear as day in my memory. At this time in my life, I knew nothing of aliens, abductions, or anything like that. I had seen science fiction, Star Wars and E.T., but I didn't make any correlation between what I experienced and the fantastical creatures depicted in such films. At the time, it wasn't something I was really that into. I didn't gain an interest in or real knowledge of extraterrestrials and ufology until a few years later, 12 to 13 years old. Perhaps it was my experience that solidified the yearning to find out more. The farm itself is situated on 200 acres, 3/4 of which are open fields and the rest being a mix of pasture and lightly forested areas with a small creek that runs through the center of the property. These areas are divided up into paddocks separated by barbed wire and electric fences. There are 3 houses, sitting on 1 acre each, adjacent to each other in a row, east to west, on a small hill in the front northern corner of the property. I lived with my immediate family in the middle house, with my uncles and great-grandparents, still alive at the time, homes on either side, respectively. My grandparents' home sits at the end of the row going towards the rest of the property. There are a few barns and various outbuildings situated at the end of the row on another acre. All told, the residential portion of the property is about 4 acres, on said hill, overlooking the rest of the property. This will be relevant as I describe directions and such. It was late evening at the tail end of summer, early August, as I hadn't started school yet. It must have been after 11:30 or midnight because the adults in my family at the time were older and went to sleep right after the 10 p.m. newscast, Central Time Zone. I typically would have a bedtime of 9 p.m. Naturally, I would stay up much later, reading books or watching my TV with the brightness and sound turned down. I was not asleep, so there was no chance that the event was a dream or some kind of sleep paralysis. Furthermore, another family member witnessed me awake in the house directly after this event. Either way, after I was sure the adults had gone to bed, I went to the kitchen to get a drink of water. As I was standing at the kitchen sink, I looked out the window and noticed a bright orange glow at the bottom of the hill to the SW. We had experienced a barn fire the previous year, so I thought there might be another fire, but there was neither a smoke cloud nor a smell of smoke. Curious. So I walked out of the kitchen and to the adjacent hallway to the back door. I went outside to see what was going on before I ran around waking anybody up. Immediately, I remember that my dogs didn't come running out from under the porch to greet me. They didn't even come out and follow as I'm walking through the yard. As I'm making my way through the backyard, it was eerily quiet, no cicadas, no crickets, or any night sounds you would expect. I don't think I realized it at the time, but in hindsight it definitely stands out in my mind. I walked to the back edge of our acre towards the light. I felt a strong urge to continue my journey towards this unusual sight. I jumped the fence to my great-grandparents' yard and the back fence at the hilltop. I hoisted myself up on the top of the fence, and what I saw I won't ever forget. The creek runs through the bottom of the hill. On the other side sat a small, egg-shaped craft, standing upright. The front of the craft had a large oval-shaped hatch that was open. The orange glow was emanating from inside the craft, but the light spilled out and enveloped the craft and surrounding area. I remember the light was pulsating out in a kind of corona, like looking at a street light when you have water in your eyes. The craft itself was a silver metallic color, but it was matte, not shiny, as it didn't actually reflect any of the light like you would expect. It was maybe about 10 to 12 feet tall and perhaps just as wide around at the bottom, tapering to an area maybe 3 feet in circumference at the rounded top of the egg. It was held upright about 6 inches off the ground by what I assume was a tripod of metal legs, which, for the life of me, I remember coming straight out of the lower sides of the craft, but not out of obvious ports like an aircraft. They were only maybe a foot in length. There were no other lights that I could recall on the outside. The only source of the light was coming through the hatch. In hindsight, the craft itself reminds me of a drop pod or something like you see in sci-fi movies. It definitely didn't strike me as something you would use for regular travel. A small being, approximately 3.5 feet tall, emerges as a backlit shadow in the doorway while I sit there observing. It exits the craft and begins what looks to me like taking samples of soil or plant life, then turning around and going back inside. He did this a couple of times as I was watching from the top of the hill. He did not seem to notice me. Now here is where it gets somewhat weird in my mind. The creature at first looked like a kind of, and I'm serious now, Ewok, but without the clothing. It was small and furry from the distance I was observing it. I was on that fence watching this creature do his work for about 2 minutes, more or less. At some point, I decide to jump down and start walking down the hill to get closer. I remember being more excited than scared because, in my young mind, this was like something I had seen on TV come to life, and I was the only one to be witnessing it. So I make my way down the hill, and suddenly I'm aware of something off to the right, back over my shoulder. It's the whoosh sound of something running up behind me from the other side of the fence. I turn to look back, and as I do, the sound of a crash of tin metal rings out into the night. I realize quickly that something had just run through a gap in the fence by the gate that my uncle had plugged up with a sheet of tin metal. I see a blur rush past me, and I turn to follow it as it speeds down the hill to the craft. The other being looks up the hill in my direction and then turns to scurry into the craft as the other one gets to him. I begin running down the hill trying to catch up to them. Here my memory jumps, and I'm standing on the other side of the creek, in front of the craft, staring at the open hatch. One of the creatures steps out. At this point he looks like the furry Ewok-like creature, but then this fuzzy shell dissipates, and standing in front of me is what could best be described as a short gray. One thing I should point out is that it didn't look precisely the way you see it presented in most pop culture and media. The head was large but not the ridged, angular teardrop shape, rather, it was like a human head, just a little more bulbous. It reminds me a bit of the Watcher from Marvel Comics, but really more like an oversized embryo head. The eyes were large and human-like, but not pointed at the edges like in popular depictions. They were reminiscent of eyes like a sugar glider's, nocturnal eyes, and not completely black. They just had very large pupils that are dilated to let in as much light as possible. This is the best I can describe them, and to me it makes logical sense because they operate mostly in the dark. It had small slits for nostrils and a bump of a nose. It had a small mouth, but I couldn't make out any teeth. When it opened its mouth, it didn't utter any words. Its body was small and of a slight build, much like you see in media depictions. The only thing I can say is that they look very light and fragile, and their movements are very fluid and methodical. Long arms, long fingers, very thin legs, and small feet that are split in the center like ninja shoes. It wore a full, tight bodysuit that was form-fitting and made of a dark, very dark gray or very dark navy, material that had a kind of faint metallic sparkle in it, but it didn't absorb or reflect light. They had 5 skinny fingers. The one outside the craft had gloves on, but the other one did not. He may have taken them off as the one outside did later on. They both had on standard military-style boots, no laces, that, again, were split like ninja shoes. As the furry form dissipated, it seemed intrigued by my reaction that I could see it in its true form. I know now that it was most likely observing my subconscious thoughts and tried to disguise itself as this Ewok to either mislead me into thinking I imagined it or to lure me into a false sense of security so I wouldn't be afraid. Either way, I was not afraid, and I actually waved at it and said, "Hello." When I spoke, the other entity leaned back out of the hatch and looked at me, and the one on the ground smiled and looked back at his partner. They began making what sounded to me like light chirping or clicking sounds. They seemed to be having a brief conversation about the fact that I could see their true forms, I wasn't freaking out, and what to do with me. The one inside the craft didn't seem too keen on me being there. He seemed a little freaked out I had shown up, and judging from the way he bolted down that hill, I can't say I blame him. Either way, the one on the ground must have convinced him to let me hang around a bit, because he basically just kind of went, "All right, whatever you say, but you deal with it and don't say I didn't tell you so if he starts freaking out." Kind of comical and humanizing when you think about it. So he comes towards me and tells me, "Hello." This was done telepathically, as I realized later, but at the time I really didn't notice it was telepathy, as I spoke to him with my actual physical voice, but his voice was in my mind but still seemed no different than if you and I were talking at the dinner table. Kind of hard to explain that, so I hope it makes sense. I asked him what they were doing out here. He told me they were taking samples. He said they were from far away but closer than we think. He said they visit often and keep an eye on things. He told me they were on a research mission. I asked him if I could help. He hesitated a bit, then said, "Sure." He turned back to the craft for a moment and came back with a cylinder and a small metal tube. He kneeled down and motioned for me to come closer. I did. He took the small metal tube and pressed the bottom sides. The end of the tube opened like a bird's beak. He scooped up a bit of soil from the ground, and the tube snapped shut. He then took the cylinder, and I noticed there were some holes at the top. He slides the tube into one of the holes, and it clicks into place. He produces another metal tube, opens the end, and hands it to me. I do the same as he did, and I try to close it, but I can't find the mechanism on the sides to make it close. He seems amused by this, and I hand it to him. He tells me it only works for them, and he snaps it shut and places it in the cylinder. We do this a few more times, me scooping the dirt and him closing the tubes and placing them in the holes until we fill the cylinder. As he is placing items back in the craft, I begin looking around for other things I think he would be interested in. I hand him a few stones that had flint in them and tell him they're my favorite kind. I pull up a couple of plants and tell him a bit about them, based on what I know. He seemed above it all, but being that I was a child, he humored me anyway. I tell him that I am good at catching frogs and crawfish from the creek and that he would like one. He said that they don't take biological specimens, that wasn't their department. They were looking for elements. I should mention at this point that where they had landed was on top of an area where, the previous year, my uncle had buried some of the scrap and debris from the barn fire. There were also some old refrigerators and other metal things buried there over the years. It was a bit of a mini landfill. The dirt in this area was still somewhat barren and freshly dug. I believe that this is what might have brought them to this specific spot, a high concentration of metal under the ground. This entire bit of time while we were taking samples was probably about 30 to 45 minutes. After we finished, I asked if I could see inside. He said I could have a look, but there wasn't much to see. He pointed up into the sky and told me that a much larger ship was waiting for them. He turned and stepped up into the craft. I was told to just look and not touch anything when I tried to step up. I leaned in from the doorway and craned my neck around to see as much as I could. Inside, the craft seemed larger than it appeared on the outside, but not by much. Of course, this is all relative to our sizes, and I was a child at the time. The walls were stark white and concave, matching the egg-shaped exterior. I looked up to the ceiling and noticed where the light was coming from. The round center of the ceiling was just brightly glowing with a golden orange light. It was blinding if I looked too long, but the interior was much more dim than the bright glow outside would lead you to believe. There was a kind of low, shallow shelf around the central edge of the walls. There were recesses in the shelf that contained the sample canisters. There were also some cube containers, which I assumed contained larger samples of things, but we never used them, so I'm not sure. To one side the shelf bulged out, and there was a kind of control panel with 2 seats, like small bucket seats next to each other, each perched on a single pedestal. There were no buttons, switches, or anything else on the panel, but what's most intriguing is that there were flat touchscreen panels, much like the tablets we use today. There were symbols and other markings on the panel screens, but for the life of me, I couldn't reproduce them if I tried. Directly above this control panel was a bit of a recessed area flatter to the wall but a little darker than the rest of the wall. The sail was a type of port or window to see out of the craft. This window was a strip about 1 foot high and 3 feet across. The first entity placed his finger on a touchscreen. The window popped open, allowing me to see out. It didn't appear to be visible from the exterior of the craft. I kind of exclaimed wow, and then it popped closed again. At this point the first one tells me that it is time for them to be going. They have already taken too long and will most likely be reprimanded for letting me help them. I asked him if I could come along with them. He tells me that they cannot do that at this time. They are not allowed to bring back biological specimens, repeating what he said before. Besides, I would not be able to survive for long, and they had no nourishment for me. I remember asking him what nourishment means, and he told me that they had nothing for me to eat. I told them I could go back home and make a snack. He said I would need more food than that. I told him I like pizza and we could get some. He seemed to find my insistence humorous, but his partner seemed to be getting annoyed, and he told me it wasn't possible and that he would take me home. The next thing I remember is that we are both back in the hallway of my house, standing just inside the back door. The entity tells me thank you for my assistance and that I was a good helper. I asked him if they would be back for me. He said that right now I was too young, maybe in a few years they would be back. Being stubborn, I told him I really wanted to go. He said, just wait, and then told me to hurry along. He really needed to leave because they can't stay here for too long in our environment. He actually said atmosphere, but when I asked what that was, he said something about the air and climate, but I didn't comprehend these things at the time. He seemed increasingly anxious while inside my house. Then he backed up and just phased out of the house directly through the back door. I turned around to go back out the hall to my room. At that moment, one of my uncles, who was staying with us, opened the door to his room, next to mine, and asked what I was doing up. I told him I was getting a drink of water, and I began to tell him about how I helped a little man I had met in the backyard. He groggily tells me that I left the light on in the kitchen and to go to bed. It's 3:30 in the morning. Then he slams his door shut and goes back to bed. I go to the kitchen to turn off the light, but it isn't on. The glow from the craft is still shining in from outside. I watch out the window for a bit, and after a few moments, the light fades out, and I see a greenish-white bolt of light shooting up into the sky from below the hill. It's dark again, and I turn around and head back to my room. I didn't sleep the rest of the night and waited till the sun came up. In the days following, I tried telling my family about what I saw, but no one seemed to believe me, of course. My uncle told them that he had seen me awake that night and thought I had gone outside again. Back then, I would sometimes sneak outside and play with the dogs or stargaze and stuff. My parents just told me to stay inside, something about the boogeyman, blah blah blah, the usual parental stuff about not going outside late at night. The only one in my family that ever believed me was my late grandmother. She told me that she had seen them before, but she told me they were angels. She was a deeply religious person who, towards the end of her life, often talked about seeing angels and kept a collection of angel knickknacks. As I got older and had a few more encounters with these beings, I would discuss them with her, but she always referred to them as angels. I also spent a lot of time going back to the landing site looking for any clues. It retained this kind of charged air around the area for quite some time after the event. The cows typically avoid this area as well. My uncle set up a feeding pen near it for a while, but he had to move it since the cows wouldn't touch it and the hay kept rotting. Incidentally, he got a mule a few years back, and any time he is in that particular paddock, he'll stand some ways off from that patch of ground and bray in that direction. If you attempt to guide him over or near it, he will resist and kick back, so I chose not to try that again. This particular uncle hasn't heard my story. My cousin has also found a few cattle and goats mutilated on the property over the years, but never in this particular paddock. Very strange indeed. I've had a handful of encounters with what I wholeheartedly believe were extraterrestrial beings. I would learn more about them not only from books and media but also directly from the entities themselves. I am now in my mid-30s. I no longer live on the farm, but I do visit often. Whenever I think of it, I go to that spot by the creek and look for signs that they have returned and try to see if they left anything behind. So far, I just have the memories of my experiences. Second encounter. Hill country humanoid. This happened in autumn, circa 1993. It was probably around Labor Day because it was a 3-day weekend. I was about 11 years old. One of my uncles, who worked off and on in construction, had just gotten a job as a caretaker for a piece of property in the Texas Hill Country. My uncle and his wife moved into an RV-style trailer home in a 3 or 4 acre clearing of cedar and juniper, about 30 to 40 feet behind a large 3.5-story Victorian-style house on this property. The house was something like you would see on a plantation. It was unmistakably distinct from the ranch-style or old German-style homes prevalent in the area. It was old and dilapidated, with a huge wraparound porch, peeling paint, and just a creepy vibe. It always felt as though someone was watching you. I didn't get to spend much time inside the house. We only briefly toured the bottom floor of the house when we arrived. My uncle said no one was allowed anywhere else since the owner believed animals were in the residence and there was already extensive interior damage. The owner planned to remodel the house the following spring. The previous owners were obviously very wealthy and were in the cattle business or something like that. I really don't remember too much and haven't researched its history. My family had come up for a visit, to enjoy a small barbecue, and to take a brief break. Now the trailer home itself was a kind of split level. At the front there was a master bedroom upstairs, a conjoined living room/kitchen area extending to the back end, and a small set of steps leading off the side down to a little bedroom that popped out from the side of the trailer home. This was my bedroom for the weekend. My parents slept in the master bedroom, and my uncle and his wife slept on a pull-out in the living room because they're hospitable like that. The first night, Friday, my uncle mentioned in dinner conversation how his wife, who was pregnant at the time, had been having strange feelings about being on the property. She just felt uneasy and couldn't seem to relax. My parents chalked this up to the difficulties of carrying twins. My uncle mentioned that they heard noises and saw lights coming from inside the big house one night. Discussion was had about the age of the property and possible hauntings, or perhaps transients living on the property, but my uncle seemed adamant it was just animals and the nature of living on old rural property that had sat abandoned for a couple of decades. This particular uncle was a Vietnam veteran, and though prone to telling stories and jokes in a gregarious fashion, he wasn't the type to just make things up out of the blue, as he had seen some SHT, as they say. Usually the stories he told were pretty serious subject matter. We didn't really focus too much on all this, but that house really did just loom over all of us and literally cast a shadow over the weekend's proceedings. Saturday afternoon we played an impromptu baseball game on the front lawn of the house. After a while, it was just my uncle and me. We moved to the strip of lawn between the house and the trailer and started playing catch and talking. We then heard a crashing noise coming from inside the house. My uncle looks up to the right-hand side of the second floor and sees a light coming from a window above the porch overhang. I see his reaction and look in the direction he is. There is a faint blue light coming from inside the house. It seems that the light is not coming from the room with the window but rather shining in from the hall. The light is faint but noticeable. About this time my dad steps out of the trailer to ask if we want to play cards. He stops mid-sentence and says, "What is that?" As soon as he speaks, the light goes out. My uncle and I turn and head to the trailer. My dad and my uncle start discussing what the light is. My dad thinks it might be something electrical. They decide to go over and take a look. My aunt and I stand outside waiting for them. My aunt tells me, there are little gremlins in that house. I ask her what she means, and she tells me that there are these little gremlins that run around on the property, and they live in the house. Matter of fact, just like that. She said that she woke up one night and saw one in the living room. It ran out of the door. She didn't tell my uncle because she thought he'd think her crazy. But a few nights later, they were sitting in the living room one night and saw lights out the window. She thinks it was the gremlins working out there. This is what my uncle was talking about on the first night, her feeling uneasy. After a few minutes, my dad and uncle return and say they didn't see anything, of course. My uncle doesn't mention anything about gremlins. I ask him if it's the lights they talked about the night before. He said, "I told you there's something in that house." He said it kind of jokingly, though. In hindsight, I think he was just trying to not scare anyone or seem weird. Maybe he was trying to pull a prank or something, but he's not the type, and he wouldn't be so elaborate. At this point I didn't know what to think. I didn't immediately think extraterrestrials, despite my previous experience. I guess it just didn't click. I didn't really think about it much at this time in my life anyways. In fact, I found myself thinking more about the little gremlins from the old Bugs Bunny cartoon. The final night, Sunday night, was when things got weird, at least for me. Sunday we had the barbecue. The day was fairly uneventful. That night, I was just beginning to fall asleep. I heard and felt 3 powerful knocks on the side of the trailer. Thump, thump thump. It was hard enough to wake me up, and I'm a bit of a heavy sleeper. At first, I thought someone had fallen down the stairs. I get up and look around the corner, up the short staircase to the living room. The lights are off, and my uncle and his wife appear to be asleep on the couch. I lay back down and try to put it out of my mind. I was in bed maybe 15 minutes when I heard a sound outside my window right by my head. I'm fairly certain I hadn't fallen asleep yet. I turn to look, and I am staring face to face with a gray-type alien being with only a pane of glass between us. He has his head turned and is looking down and to his right at something on the ground. I'm frozen solid in fear. As soon as I sense that he is going to turn and see me, I turn my whole body away and cover my head. I lay there, attempting to catch my breath and hoping that I was dreaming. After a minute or two, I work up the courage to turn back around to the window. The entity is no longer by my window, but I see it moving around by the tree line a few yards from the trailer house. It's about 3 to 4 feet tall and looks the same as the creature I had seen before as a child, only a little taller. This time, the uniform it was wearing was a silver color that absorbed and amplified shadow. Hard to describe, but the dark bits of where shadows fell on the suit became blacker than black. This effect kind of broke up the body when viewed. I was sitting there thinking about this and staring at this creature. He didn't seem to notice me or really care. There was no interaction between us. I didn't have the courage to say hello or anything this time. Not that he would hear me, I guess. I was just genuinely freaked out and trying to figure out if I was dreaming or not. I'm thinking these things maybe 5 minutes or so. Just then, these 2 blue orbs of light appear in the trees about 2 feet off the ground on either side of the entity. They're the size of a large beach ball and about as bright as a camp lantern. The one on the left begins to move to the center towards the entity, and the one on the right begins moving forward out of the trees. As soon as it gets past the tree line and onto the open yard, the light from it gets a bit brighter. I could see the outline of the entity and the shape of its head. The skin was a dull gray-pink tinged blue by the orb's light. The entity turns around and faces the orb and then turns back. As soon as it turns back, it begins to emit a glow of blue light. It appeared like a radioactive kind of halo emanating from inside its body. Like a bioluminescence. It wrapped around its whole body and then completely engulfed the being in bright light. This happened in the course of maybe 2 seconds. The flash of light was so bright it lit up the whole yard and trailer house like it was daytime. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them, the entity was gone, and in its place was a perfectly round orb of blue light. Now here is how I know this wasn't a dream. A few seconds after this flash of light, I hear my uncle's wife get up in the living room. She calls my uncle's name, and I hear her tell him to get up and look out the window. As soon as I hear her tell him to look at the lights outside, I spring up from my bed and run into the living room. I tell them I can see the lights outside and tell my aunt that I saw the gremlins outside and they're inside the balls of light. My uncle says that he knew it, that they were in the house. We look out the window, and the 3 orbs of light are still there. I go to knock on my parents' door and tell them to look out the window at the lights. I get back and stand with my aunt and uncle at the window. We watch as the light on the left zooms off to our left and back towards the rear end of the trailer. The one on the right, which is now in the center, and the one that was the entity move back towards the tree line. I run to the other side of the living room to see if I can see the other light there. My aunt calls me back to the window and says they see it over on their side again. I run back to join them and look out. I see it come from our right side. It had made a loop around the trailer. As soon as it gets back to the other 2 orbs, they all begin to rise up another 6 feet into the air. They all combine together in the center and shoot off straight into the sky. Once again the light is so bright it lights up the whole area. My mom and dad come out of the bedroom and down the stairs, and my mom says, "What was that?" This part in the living room was maybe 45 seconds to a minute from the time I came into the living room to the time the lights all took off. I tell my mom and dad what I saw, and I thought I was dreaming, but my aunt and uncle saw the lights. My parents said they didn't see any creatures or the orbs themselves. They were trying to figure out what I was saying when they heard me running in the house and knew everyone else was awake. They were getting clothes on to come outside and saw the bright flash on the window as the orbs were leaving. We all sat around for the next hour or so as we talked about what we saw. My parents were pretty skeptical, but I guess they didn't know what to think. They just thought it was weird. They said they thought maybe it was a kid or a car pulling into the property or something. They didn't really believe me about the alien, and I didn't tell them about my last experience either. I don't know why. We all went back to sleep after a while, but I slept in the living room. My uncle and aunt ended up moving out of there that next year when the owner and his crew came in. I think they ended up tearing down the old house. From what I recall, my uncle told my dad it was too damaged inside, and the guy didn't want to pay for it. Shame, it was a nice house. My family doesn't really talk about this unless I bring it up. But really, I don't think they have a worthwhile opinion on the matter. I did talk to my uncle once later about it. But that's a whole other story. The main difference from my last encounter was there was no craft of anything. They traveled in these orbs of light. Also, the entity itself seemed more robotic and stoic than before. It didn't seem to have a personality or give off any kind of emotive presence. Personally, I think it fell off the roof of the trailer house and was stunned, and the others were collecting it. It did seem a little off to me compared to my experiences in the future. The one thing that affected me the most about this encounter compared to the last one was how scared I was. It caused me to have trouble sleeping for quite a while after that. I would sleep with a pillow over my head, and I wouldn't sleep near a window that didn't have a cover over it. One of the main things from my perspective as well was that I didn't get to have a friendly reaction with the entity this time, how utterly terrified my aunt was, and that my army vet uncle was scared a bit and seemed angry that something like this was happening to them. I am still not sure what to think about it, other than it was a little traumatizing for a while afterwards.